All right. Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on your time zone, and welcome to Samvera Virtual Connect 2023, Day 2. My name is Nick Homenda. I am Head of Digital Initiatives at Tufts University Tisch Library, and welcome and thanks everyone for joining us again today. So we have some housekeeping today. Please note that this webinar has live closed captioning available. And so you simply have to click on the closed captioning button at the bottom of the Zoom window. The conference is being recorded, and after the sessions today and yesterday, we'll have videos available on the Samvera YouTube channel, and slides will be available in the Samvera community repository. Attendees are going to receive links to both of the days after the event. We have the Q&A function in Zoom for your questions, and we also have the Connect Slack channel available for questions and conversations, and both of those channels were active yesterday, so continue to use them today. If you need access to the Samvera Slack workspace, there is a link on the Virtual Connect program where you can request that access. We also have collaborative community notes in a Google Doc, and we welcome anyone to help contribute to note-taking as we move through the day. And you can reach those on the Samvera Wiki by going to svc.samvera.org. One more bit of housekeeping I forgot. My name is Nick Homenda. My pronouns are he, him, his, and I'm at Tufts University Tisch Library. Today's sessions are going to run for 3 hours with a 10-minute break, 50 minutes from the start, so just under 1 hour from now. We'll also have a second 10-minute break, 50 minutes after the first break. And I'd like to take a moment to thank the planning committee for this year's Virtual Connect event. I was on the planning committee, as well as Emily Leinema from Indiana University, Margaret Mellinger from Oregon State University, and Heather Greer-Klein, who was also an amazing MC yesterday. A quick note on how we approach working together in the Samvera community. Samvera is dedicated to providing a welcoming and harassment-free community experience for everyone. From the very beginning, this open source collaborative has been committed to openness and transparency in all that it does, code, designs, and discussions. We're equally committed to helpful and respectful communication. Historically, women, people of color, people with disabilities, and other marginalized groups have been excluded from technology work, and ironically, from open source software communities in particular. The Samvera community is committed to removing barriers to participation wherever they exist. We have community guidelines that express our values in the context of the everyday activities of the Samvera community and serve as the principles by which our members act and collaborate. If you haven't already, please take time to review the documents today. We expect participants at all community events and forums to honor these standards. And we have 3 helpers in Slack today, and also they're available via email. The helpers are also a great resource if you have specific questions about how to participate in the Samvera community or concern about the community guidelines or code of conduct. Also, don't forget to save the date for Samvera Connect 2023. Which is our first in-person conference since 2019 and will take place October 22nd through 26th in Philadelphia. And more details are coming soon. If you want to help us make Samvera Connect 2023 a valuable and fun conference, we have lots of ways to help. You can join the program committee to help shape the conference. We also have the award committee for the Julie Allenson Award, our annual recognition of outstanding community collaboration. Details for both of these are linked from the community notes and on today's schedule page. We'll also be looking for volunteers to help out in person at the conference once we get closer to October. All right, so that's all I have as far as introductions today. We have a couple of minutes, but if it's all right, maybe we'll go ahead and get started since I see Julie here. So I'm going to stop sharing. And first up, we have Julie Hardesty from Indiana University to present Your Support Makes a Difference, how it works to contribute to open source in Samvera.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, Julie.
All right. Share. And I am presenting. Is that working?
Looks great.
All right. All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Julie Hardesty. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm a metadata analyst at Indiana University. I've also been a participant in the Samvera community for a while now. So I wanted to kind of come in today and talk about how your support makes a difference and what it looks like to contribute to open source in Samvera at this point. I also want to share that I am speaking to you today from the ancestral homelands of the Miami, Delaware, Potawatomi, and Shawnee people. This is the land on which Indiana University Bloomington sits, and these nations were forcibly removed from this land to make room for towns and counties and the seminary that became Indiana University. These nations still exist today, but their people are no longer located here. Continuing to recognize and name the harm inflicted on the Miami, Delaware, Potawatomi, and Shawnee people continues to center efforts to bring equity and justice to them. This support, no matter how small, does make a difference. Together with others continuing to state these truths and amplify the needs of those still living, we can grow more support and we can make a difference. For the Samvera community, I would like to answer the question, whose support makes a difference, in the form of a Venn diagram. And you may not be surprised to see that this Venn diagram is a series of overlapping circles because everyone's support makes a difference. If you're new to participating in the Samvera community, if you are familiar with participating in the Samvera community, if you're a developer, if you're an end user, there are ways that everyone can contribute and support the open source work that's happening here. So just to get into how this is working, I'm going to go over real briefly what some of the major Samvera software projects are that are happening in the community right now. So Hyrax is a Ruby on Rails engine for creating a digital repository application. Haiku is a software that allows you to run multiple Hyrax applications as a service. So it's a multi-tenant Hyrax application. Avalon Media System is what I refer to as a senior system for digital audio and video collection management. It's a project that's been part of Samvera for quite a while. And then there are also many core components, and these are various Ruby gems that are used by Hyrax, Haiku, Avalon, as well as other community-based applications that folks in the Samvera community are working on. So can I just try to use any of this right now without doing anything else? The answer is yes. There are demonstration sites. There are 3 demonstration sites for Hyrax. So dev.newrax is running the Hyrax, the latest release, most recent release of Hyrax, which is at this point Hyrax 4.0 release candidate 2, which just came out a couple of days ago. pg.newrax is running Hyrax with a backend that is not Fedora 4. Right now, that is a Postgres backend, and it is not it's not the most recent release. It is Hyrax 4.0 release candidate 1 at this point, I think. And dev.newrax is running Hyrax with a Fedora 4 backend. And then stable.newrax is another flavor of Hyrax, which is the most recent stable release, which right now is at Hyrax 3.5. So those are all available you can create an account and try uploading. You can look at the dashboard. You can see how loading content works in those, how metadata is working, different features that are available, and how searching and discovery is working. Avalon, likewise, also has a demonstration site. It's demo.avalonmediasystem.org, and that is running Avalon 7.6 right now. And likewise, that is also a system that you can go and try out, create an account, log in, and try uploading content and try features available with Avalon. So should you try running any of this locally? Yes, you should. So if you want to, this is going to talk you through trying things out with Hyrax. So this is basically my kind of use case to walk through what it looks like to do to try a local to try something out locally. So for trying out Hyrax, you do need Docker, and Docker is available in a variety of ways to install on a variety of systems, and need a release or download of code from the GitHub Samvera organization. And for this one, it would for using Hyrax, it would be the Hyrax repository. If you're developing, you can do the checkout of a working copy of the repository and have that all set up with GitHub. But if you're just wanting to try things out locally and have a Hyrax-based application running, you don't actually need to go through all of that. So also handy is being connected on Slack. The Samvera Slack is a great place to ask questions or talk to people about any issues you might be encountering. And I also recommend snacks and a beverage, but I think I would always recommend snacks and a beverage. So. All right, so for running Hyrax, the Docker side of things, I'll just kind of talk through what the setup looks like for me. I have a MacBook Pro 2018, and it's an Intel chip, not an ARM. And I'm using the Docker desktop app. I have that installed. And so within that Docker desktop app, I am actually doing some adjustments in the settings for resources, just to make sure I've got enough space available for installing the app and being able to load up content and have it be indexable, that sort of thing. I've had Docker in place for a while on my machine. So I've also gone and cleaned up old images and volumes. So, getting rid of things that aren't being used in Docker, and that frees up some space as well. For the code side of things with Hyrax, I tend to head over to the releases in Hyrax. There are various ways you can do this. You can go to the main branch and get at the code that's the latest that's there in the main branch for the Hyrax repository. But I actually go over to the releases, and I went ahead and gave it a try with Hyrax version release 4, release candidate 2 for version 4, and I've given that's what I'm going to be talking about here, giving that a try. And that is the most recent release, but the most recent release is not necessarily the same as the stable release. So the stable release, if you remember, is 3.5 right now for Hyrax. So there can be a difference, but it's worth it to try out whichever way you want to go. The most recent releases or a stable release, or what's currently in the main branch if you want the most up to date. So anyway, you can get that as a zip file, the code from GitHub, and you can unzip that somewhere that you have somewhere locally where you have admin access. And then from there, I don't use the Docker the desktop application. I actually go into the terminal at that point and go into that directory that I just unzipped. And to build the application, that's the first step, is just using Docker compose build, and that is going to be building the default application that comes with this code when you download it. There's an internal test app that is set up, and it will build an application that will run locally using Fedora 4 as the backend. So this is running Hyrax with a Fedora 4 backend. And doing this build with the Docker compose build command goes through 33 steps, and it took about 20 minutes last night for that to build. And it built successfully. I didn't have any problems, but that is one reason for the snacks and a beverage. So, but Slack is also available if builds fail. There are various reasons why things may not work trying to build the Hyrax application, but for the most part, anytime that I have encountered someone trying to build the Hyrax application using Docker, since we've had that in place, we've figured out how to make it work. So it seems to actually be something that can work pretty reliably for just about any setup that we've encountered so far. So that's been pretty neat to see. All right, so the next step after the build, after that completes, is to actually start the Hyrax engine so that your Hyrax-based application is running. And so starting the engine, if you've got the Docker desktop application, there's an interface that allows you to start and stop and do those sorts of actions. But I just do this in the terminal as well, and that's the Docker compose up command. And that will, in the terminal, you'll see all sorts of steps running, and you can actually see this in the desktop application as well, but you'll see all sorts of steps running for starting up all of the things that are used for generating and starting a Hyrax-based application. And what I tend to watch for is getting to this DB migrate step. And when it says that it's exited with code 0, that's when I know that more than likely I've got a running application that I can go visit. So then you can head over to your browser to localhost port 3000, and that will be that will show you the Hyrax application running with Fedora 4 in the backend using Active Fedora. And that internal test app that is running that is what's called DASI. And there's actually a hidden folder in the, or not a hidden folder, but it's a folder in the GitHub repository that you've downloaded that is that's .dasi that has this code in it. So within the terminal, you can use Control-C to shut down the application if you don't want it to run anymore. And the Docker desktop application, if you're using that, has controls for that as well. So when it's running in the browser, you'll see generic looking Hyrax application, and you'll see up in the top left that it is Hyrax that's running, and down in the lower left for what I have installed with the release, I've got indication that it's version 4.0 release candidate 2. So you can kind of see, depending on what it is that you're running, you'll see those indicators locally when you're running these internal test applications. So, that is great, but now what? I've got this thing running locally, or I know that these demonstration sites exist and I can go try things online. I can look at these, I can look at Hyrax that way. And that is cool and all, but have I really done anything that's like open source yet? And I would say, yes, this is supporting open source, giving these things a try. And especially if you share what your experience has been. So trying the demonstration sites and reporting issues or reporting successes. That is helpful information to let the community know what is working and what is not. And trying things likewise, if you try any of this locally, if you try to build a Hyrax application and run that locally and report issues or successes with that, that also helps the community know more about how well the software is working. And ways to do that are a few. Posting on Slack is probably one of the best ways, especially if you encounter an issue that you're trying to figure out immediately. Posting on Slack to talk about what you're experiencing is probably one of the best ways to get started. So for Hyrax, there are actually some specific channels. There's Hyrax WG, which is the Hyrax Maintenance Working Group. There's a Hyrax interest group channel, and there's a Hyrax Valkyrie channel if you're trying the Valkyrized version of Hyrax, which is not what I was talking about, but is also available to try. And there tend to be specific channels like this for the different development efforts for those different software projects that I listed before, and we'll get back to that. In addition, and in the GitHub repository for whatever the software project is that you're working with, there's going to be an issues list, and you can take a look at the issues that are being reported there and what problems have already been reported or are being worked on. Likewise, some of the projects have some of the software efforts have project boards in GitHub, and those are ways to organize issues for specific development efforts that might be occurring for that project. So if you do encounter an issue and you've got something that's broken or something that needs to be worked on, you can report an issue. Anyone can do this. So you can report an issue, creating that for Hyrax. We have an issue template that you can follow. And I really appreciated Yimtran's presentation yesterday about issue templates, because I think we've got some information here and we've got some good prompts, but I think we can improve it. So, but we do ask for when a new issue is created to give some description and explain what your expected behavior is, what actually is happening, what you're experiencing. And then the most important part is the steps to reproduce the behavior. So listing out what you need to do in the Hyrax application to make whatever the issue is occur. And that helps when people are trying to figure out how to provide a fix. So that is something that you can do. The issue list, that if you want to take a look at that and see what has been reported for Hyrax, everything is listed in GitHub all together with these issues. We also try to use labels to kind of group things together, the types of issues. So you'll see a couple there have a bug label on them. To differentiate them from other issues in the list. So you can take a look through there at the labels that are being used and the different sorts of things that are being worked on. And there's also the possibility of taking a look at an issue and trying it out yourself and seeing what happens. So testing an issue and adding a comment on the issue is a super helpful way to contribute. So in Hyrax, since we do have those prompts in the template where we ask for the steps to reproduce the behavior, you can look for that. And if there are steps listed, you should be able to follow those steps and try them either on one of the demo sites that is running Hyrax, or locally. If you've got a build that you're running locally, you can give these issues a try that way as well. And adding comments about anything that you try here related to one of these issues is helpful. So if you can make the issue happen when you're testing, that helps to verify that we've got something that needs to be worked on, especially if it's an issue that's been sitting for a while. If you can't reproduce the issue, that is also helpful, because that indicates to us that maybe we've got an issue that's been worked on and figured out, but we just didn't get the issue updated in GitHub. So that is a very helpful way to contribute. There's also possibilities of reviewing pull requests. So pull requests are sitting next to the issues there in GitHub for in the repository, and these are code changes that people have proposed and are offering up as possibilities to merge back into the code base for whatever the software project is. In this case, it would be for Hyrax. And one of the things that is always required for any pull request is a review of some kind. And so if there is a pull request here that is dealing with something that you're interested in, or you think is a priority to be worked on, it is actually pretty helpful just to provide that review to say, this is important to me, this is important to the community to do something about. Even if you can't verify that the code itself is the change that needs to be merged in, it's still helpful to kind of give that a boost, give a pull request a boost, and kind of let folks know that something is there that might need to be worked on and brought back into the code base. So essentially, if you want to work on something, you can totally work on something, and it can be a small something. So it's possible. But wait, there's more. All right, this is the infomercial part. So back to the Samvera projects that we have. It's not just Hyrax. There's Hyrax exists, and it has its Slack channels. There's a Hyrax interest group that meets monthly. But in addition to that, Avalon Media System, Avalon has a Slack channel that you can get in touch. There's an Avalon user roundtable that meets monthly. Haiku has a Slack channel as well for discussion, and there's an interest group for Haiku that meets monthly. And there's a whole variety of core components and more. This is actually listing out the other GitHub repositories that exist in the Samvera organization. So a lot of these are considered core components, but there's a whole variety of things there. And there are various things that are being worked on with those in varying degrees. So there is a component maintenance Slack channel that is available for component discussion, but I think probably any sort of discussion that people want to have is welcome there. And there's an interest group that is also having meetings regarding component maintenance. And for Avalon Media System, taking a look at what they have available on GitHub, there is actually there's Docker installation instructions. So Avalon is another system that can be tried locally if you want. So there's instructions provided for that. And there are a list of GitHub issues, and you can see what sorts of things are being worked on there with Avalon. Haiku, similarly, it's a little bit different, but there are Docker Dory install instructions. So trying to set things up with Haiku is kind of running a service with multiple Hyrax applications running. So it's a slightly different sort of thing, but it is something that looks like you can try that locally as well. And there's also a GitHub issue list there, so you can see what sorts of things are being worked on within Haiku. And then as an example of a core component, this is the IIIF manifest repository, and installations for these they're generally gems that you can add into applications. So it's slightly different. You're not necessarily dealing with Docker, but the issue list still exists, and you can see what sorts of things are being worked on, are available for review there. So in bringing this to a close, there are upcoming events. So you can do this, you can try things on your own, but these are also chances for you to meet up with others in the community and give things a try with other people. So the Samvera Developer Congress is happening May 22nd to 26th, and that's going to be a week of folks gathering together and looking at topics and working on things together that way. The Valkyrized Hyrax community effort is in place to get Hyrax on Valkyrie to the next level with I think sprints that are going to be happening at the end of near the end of the summer. The Samvera Technology Maintenance Hours Pledge Drive is always in place for people to any of this work, this contribution work that you're doing can be added and can be counted as pledged hours to Samvera. Interest groups and working groups, as I said, are out there and available for regular meeting times. And the Samvera Tech Call happens every Wednesday at noon. So if you're encountering issues, trying something, and having questions about anything, that Samvera Tech Call is always available for you. So this is essentially the point here is just this layers of effort. So little things that we do over time add up and make open source work. And so all of us are able to do this, and it's not something that requires a ton of time or a ton of effort. And it is something that can happen regardless of what your participation familiarity is in the Samvera community. If you're new to participating, if you're familiar with participating, if you're a developer, if you're an end user, it all helps to make Samvera work as an open source community, as an open source project. So thank you. There's the Developer Congress sign up. I'm going to put that link in Slack if it isn't there already. That's my contact information, but also the Samvera community manager, Heather Greer-Klein, is super helpful to get in touch with for any questions that you have about any of this. So I think it was a little bit long there. Sorry. Here you go.
Thank you so much, Julie, for this great presentation on how to get started with Samvera and also how to get involved. It was really great. There is active chat and questions in Slack, as well as some questions in the Q&A, and we have about 3 minutes. So I'm going to address the Q&A questions first, or forward them to you, and then we'll see what we can convey about the Slack discussion in the time we have left. So in the Q&A, Hyrax 2 no longer builds, so patches cannot be merged. Are there ways to get patches in so we don't have to use a branch forever? And they are referring to CI.
Oh, for the automated tests? That is not necessarily a question I'm going to be able to answer. For 2.0, yeah, so there's a branch that has patches available that's working, but it's not something that's getting merged back in. Is that what's going on?
It's saying Hyrax, yes, 2x stable can't get merged is what they just responded.
Okay. I think that would be something to bring up with the Hyrax maintenance working group and check on that, because since 4.0 isn't actually out as a full-on release yet, depending on what the 2.x change is, there might be some wiggle room there to get something added in, but I can't say for sure. So the product owner and tech lead for Hyrax would be in a better position to determine that, I think.
And Daniel Pierce just made a comment in the Connect channel in Slack, so you can see more information about Circle CI config needs for the 2x. Also, I might convey this one question that had a lot of discussion after it in Slack to you, just get your perspective on it, which is, do most or all people use Docker to run Hyrax locally now? And are those instructions available somewhere standard? If not, will the video, yes, the video, this will be available. But do you have any other thoughts about people using Docker to run Hyrax locally, and if those instructions are available? Julie?
I kind of missed a little bit of that question that you asked. Sorry, I was trying to see if is it in the Q&A?
This is in Slack.
Oh, this is in Slack. Okay.
And so I'll repeat it for you since we have about a minute left here. Do most or all people use Docker to run Hyrax locally now? And are those instructions available somewhere standard? Chris Colvard responded with containers markdown file in GitHub, but I wonder if you have any other information about that, Julie.
Yeah, I don't know if most people are running. I think that's the easiest way to try and get Hierarchs running locally is using the Docker instructions, and those are part of the READMEs that we have for in the Hierarchs GitHub repository. So that containers.md has the instructions for trying that out. So that gives you the instructions for doing what I explained, running Hierarchs with Fedora 4 backend locally. And there are also instructions for running the Valkyrized version of Hierarchs, which will start up with Postgres backend instead of Fedora 4. And those are both part of what you can get with the Hierarchs GitHub code that's available right now.
All right, well, thank you again, Julie. It's 11:30, which means it is time for our next presenter. Who is Thomas. Sure, is Thomas, are you here?
Yeah, hello everyone.
Hi, Thomas.
Can everybody hear me, or can somebody hear me?
I can hear you, and I can see you. Yeah, and feel free to share slides if you have them.
Very good, let's do that. Okay, can everyone also see my slide deck?
It looks great.
All right, great. Welcome everyone to my presentation. My name is Thomas Schurz. I'm a software developer here at the University of Cincinnati. My pronouns are he and him. I'd like to thank everyone for stopping by. My presentation is around improving our metadata through AI, artificial intelligence. And appreciate being accepted because no official conference today exists without at least saying the term AI anymore, right? And so I'm glad to have the opportunity to talk a little bit about AI and how we're going to try to use it here at the University of Cincinnati. Like most of you, I'm sure a lot of your directors and administrators are asking how we can do something with AI. And here at Cincinnati, they've asked us in our digital repository unit to think about ways we could use AI in our repository development. And so being that none of us had a lot of experience working with AI, we referred back to some of our old familiar friends, machine learning and natural language processing. And so by starting with machine learning, we kind of went back to the idea of what kind of problems can we solve with AI/machine learning. And so we started to ask ourselves in our repository, do any of these questions apply? And so very quickly we got to the classification options and we started to look at our metadata and say, okay, what types of metadata aren't being completed by the users during ingest? And then how can we improve that to enhance discovery? And so we're looked very closely at the idea of classification, but not just classification. We looked at classification using natural language processing. A lot of what gets ingested into our IR is documents that have text in them. And to enhance that, we can use natural language processing to examine the text, classify the text, extract keywords, and build encoding models, design models. And all of us led to an opportunity inside of Scholar to enhance our subject terms, right? That's the first thing that, our open keyword fields, we have the ability to enhance these subject terms using natural language processing. And then also there's an opportunity that we use something called a genre or a document type. And there's an opportunity there also to look at genre and say, can machine learning, natural language processing, and eventually AI determine what type or genre of document is being uploaded? And so we thought this was an interesting area. After doing a little bit of literature review, we learned that there are others out there working on similar type of things. So we decided to attack first the subject keywords, and then later on down the road, we'll start to look at the genre types. But essentially the tooling for both of these opportunities or tasks is kind of the same. Before we actually talk about the specific tooling, we've now prepared ourselves as a unit to start to think about AI, moving beyond just basic machine learning and natural language processing. And so there are a couple important terms that we had to get familiar with, so that once we have the tooling in place, we not only have the tooling, but we have all the other components necessary. And so AI, or in this case, natural language processing AI, requires that you have a corpus, right? That you have this body of work that you want to enhance. And then to do that, you have to come up with an algorithm or a simple tool that looks at the corpuses and makes enables and makes decisions. To do that, though, you need to have a training set, a group of items that you would like to use to train your algorithm, to provide the knowledge for what you'll see later is called a vocabulary or a training set. You'll also need a collection of documents that you would consider your test set, because a lot of the AI process is trial and error, testing, feedback loop. And so now that we as a unit became comfortable with the idea of AI and some of the components that we were going to need to take on this project, we started to look at, what makes AI different. And I think, as someone once said, AI has to replace a human function, right? It has to be seen as a decision maker. And so there is what I call the AI process, that involves identifying something, codifying that something, running it through a model, predicting the outcome, and then most importantly, the feedback that comes with predicting and running something through the model. I think that feedback loop's important to the idea of AI. Also the idea of prediction. Were these predictions useful? Do they make sense? Were they original? Those kind of things. So once we prepared that, we started to do a literature review, and we found an engine out of the National Library of Finland called ANIF. ANIF is built on Python and poetry. ANIF has 3 great interfaces. You have a command line interface. It has an API, a RESTful API, and it also has a GUI. And so how ANIF works is you build a project, and that project is composed of as what we would call 3 AI components or machine learning NLP components. The first component is a vocabulary. You have to go out in the world and say, okay, what are my subject terms that I would consider for acceptable for the subject field? And so these subject terms will be used as your recommendations or your enhancements to your metadata. Think of them as thesauruses, list of subject headings. They come in various formats: TSVs, tab separated values, CSV, comma separated, and then one of our old favorites, N triples, RDF, turtles. A lot of it come in the format, any of those formats. And so essentially what a subject vocabulary is a bunch of terms and then URIs that reference that term somewhere. And so some of the more popular ones in the ANIF project, of course, out of Finland, is you get a lot of Finnish subject vocabularies. There's also been a lot of, and these are things we learned in the process. We're going through this process. We're trying to learn what kind of vocabulary will be good for an institutional self-deposit repository. So then we went and continued our literature review and found, of course, Library of Congress is in the business of providing subject vocabularies. There's a lot of good work being done at the University of Penn in terms of not only creating these Library of Congress subject vocabularies, but also providing training data for your Library of Congress subject headings. There's also, we found UNESCO has a pretty good thesaurus. So the first step is establishing your subject vocabulary. What subject terms are acceptable to be used as enhancements to your metadata? Once you have a subject vocabulary, the next thing that an EAF requires is a bit of pre-processing. They call this an analyzer. This is where you'll get into lemmatization, tokenization, normalizing your text terms. As you pull text out of a full text document, the analyzer, creates derivatives. And like I said, lemmatization and tokenization. And here are a couple of the analyzers that a NEAF supports. As you see, they're all kind of interesting, right? Some of them just split text into words and then turn them all into lowercase. That's the simplest analyzers. Others, like the Snowball, will do some stemming. Then even more, some of the Voica analyzers will also do lemmatization, or the Spacey analyzers will do lemmatization. And that's the idea of, we used to congregate verbs in foreign language classes and English classes. And so that's the idea of taking all the derivatives of a word and considering them when you're doing your analysis of the full text. And then the third component of an ANIF project after the subject vocabulary and the analyzers is the back end. And these are different models that can be used to determine what kind of subject terms and how the relevancy ranking happens. It's all a percentage game, right? And so the most popular one is the TF-IDF model or back end. And that's basically a term counter, right? Just the frequency of different terms determines their relevancy percentage. Some of the other neat ones, they start to group words together and start to think a little bit about grouping of words and to determine their relevancy. Fast text, Amikuji, these are things based off of different algorithms, but the idea of grouping terms, and then some probability models, of course, are always important. And so there's a whole list of backends that you have to kind of explore. And that's why it's important to have a good set of test data, right? So that you can see the different result sets, see which ones are more related to your problem, and see how they work to give you the result set you're looking for. So here at UC, we've moved forward and we're comfortable with the NEAF. We've explored its options, but then we come to this training set question, right? And the idea is, as we know with a lot of the AI conversations going on around us, the idea of the training set is the back end to the AI experience. It's very important that you think about your needs and what is your vocabulary, and make sure that you have a training set that matches your vocabulary. The good thing is a lot of the people, the community around ANIF, have developed training sets for a lot of the vocabularies I mentioned earlier. Here at UC, we still struggle with the idea of maybe creating our own training set, taking on this responsibility internally, and thinking about, copyright and ownership in terms of who owns the training data, and should we use our own training data? What are our options for external training data? I think some of you are familiar with ChatGPT. They're struggling with this idea. I know recently Reddit turned off their API access to ChatGPT to kind of reel in ownership of their content. So copyright ownership, all of these use agreements, all of these are still things we're struggling with, but we're going to move forward and make decisions. Also size, loading of training sets takes time. How big of a training set do you need? and then how much of your resources can be used to load and train these various things. So those are just some of the considerations. You also see here what a training set kind of looks like. Again, you have URIs that reference different subject terms or items. All right, and so then lastly is the question of integrating all of this into Scholar. So as I said before, ANIF does a great job of providing command line interface or API interfaces. And we already have a lot of tooling for pulling out full text out of documents that are ingested. And so now we're going to work on creating a service to use that full text that's extracted through Hydra derivatives and kind of post it to a ANIF's API, get some results back. And then either we've thought about creating a mailer that will send the depositor some recommendations or enhancements. We are uncomfortable with changing the works themselves, but we like the idea of sending the depositor a mail stating that, that we've discovered some useful subject terms, and if they would like us to enhance the metadata, click here kind of thing. We're also going to have a rake task, of course, that we can use anytime we want to run different items through our what I call our subject term enhancer or DUI. And then lastly is the question of, is this something that would be useful to gemify? And that's where I would talk to the community and see if there would be some interest in something like this. And so that's our experience here at UC. We've been tasked to integrate some AI into our repositories, and we're going to use the ANIF model or machine from the Natural Library of Finland. And we're learning a lot along the way in terms of training vocabularies, how do these integrations work. And so we are at the point where once we determine some of our training concerns, we'll start to begin to put code to paper and start to connect up a news service that will run ingested full text through ANIF and then send the user an email. So thank you. I appreciate everyone listening. And if you have any questions, or if anybody else has been tasked with AI experiences or responsibilities, let us know what you're starting to develop.
Thank you so much, Thomas. It's always great to hear from you and hear this cool use case for using AI at your institution. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to use the Q&A in Zoom. We have a couple of minutes before our scheduled break. And while you're typing in those questions, I might also point folks, if you're not already looking at it, to the Connect channel, where there is quite a bit of discussion about other projects that have used or are exploring using AI and metadata at some other institutions, as well as a discussion and link to a presentation about ethics within using AI and assigning subject headings.
That's fantastic. Again, that's the exciting part about this, getting that conversation going and starting to, as a community, start to see where people are going with this new technology. As always, I'm always on Slack. Feel free to ask me questions about how our process is going, and we'll share the results when things are closer to completion.
Well, thank you again, Thomas. I'm not seeing any questions in the Q&A. So it looks like we can proceed towards our break now. Thank you again.
Mm-hmm.
This. Okay, so we've arrived at our break time, and the program will resume at the top of the hour, which will be about 11 minutes from now, which is noon Eastern time. So see you all then. Welcome back, everyone. I have 12 p.m. exactly Eastern time on my clock. So it is now time to move on to some updates from new and existing Samvera interest groups and working groups. And the first one I have on my list is the Samvera Metadata Interest Group, which is presented by Anna Marie Close. Anna Marie, are you here?
Yes, I am.
Okay.
Let me just get my slide on view. All right, let me go in view. Does everyone see my slides?
Looks great.
All right. Thank you. So I'm Anna Marie Close. I'm the Metadata Initiatives Librarian at The Ohio State University. If you can hear sirens, we are just having our normal weekly tornado siren drill here in Columbus. I am currently the solo facilitator. I'm looking for a co-facilitator. And this is a wonderful group where people in the Samvera community can come and ask questions. And I have learned so much being a part of this group. We also collaborate on base metadata recommendations for Hyrax, Haiku, and Avalon. I haven't seen anything from Avalon lately in terms of our discussion points, but some amazing work has been done because of working groups that are offshoots of this interest group. So it's a great place to learn. It's a great place to mention issues, but we also further interoperability and sharing of metadata practices and documentation within the Samvera community. So we meet the fourth Tuesday of every month at 2 p.m. Eastern, and I put a link to our wiki page, and we are hash metadata in the Samvera Slack channel. And so we've been having, as usual, our monthly open meetings. This is a great place to just drop in, even if you just want to come to one meeting or more meetings. So recently we have had invited demos. I'm very grateful that Margaret Keeby and Chrissy Reesmeyer came to give us an update on Project Surfliner. And that's related to work that was done in the M3 modeling group years ago. So that's really exciting when we see metadata work that is getting developed. And then thank you to Kai Stroud, who shared updates in terms of bulk racks. And again, really great for us to see how our work can be implemented in better ways. So related work is I posted a charter for the OAI documentation working group. We have three people that are going to work on that, including me, but we are open for more people to contribute to that group. So you can go follow that link to find the charter. And this builds on prior work to share documentation about OAI OAI implementation in the Samvera community. We found that it's not straightforward, but a lot of people have information and we want to share that. And as always, we collaborate and liaise with other Samvera groups, including the Samvera Roadmaps Alignment Group. So our next meeting is Tuesday, May 23rd at 2 p.m. Eastern. I look forward to seeing you. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Anna Marie. Seeing no questions in the Q&A, we'll move on to the next working group update, which is Brendan Quinn from Northwestern University to present the cloud deployment working group. Brendan?
That's right. Thanks. I don't have any slides prepared, but I'll drop some links into the Slack channel after this, just so people can click on them and not have to dig around. So thanks, everybody. I'm the facilitator of the Cloud Deployment Working Group, which is a new working group just recently formed. And so it came out of some communication that I was not part of actually, but some communication with AWS about Archivematica. The Archivematica community worked with them to create an AWS reference architecture for their stack there. And so there was some back and forth with them about doing the same thing for the Samvera community. So we kind of figured we should get our ducks in a row, as it were, before meeting with Greg Ritter at AWS to talk about, what could we do to work with AWS to create a reference architecture, and what would be useful about that, and what would we need to get out of it, those kind of things. So that's what our initial meetings were about. And so we actually met with Greg recently, and that recording is actually up on our wiki. So if you check out the Cloud Deployment Working Group on the Samvera wiki, there's a link to the recording there there's a password right next to the link too, just so you see that. And so we kind of talked about like, what is AWS higher education doing? Greg is the lead of university libraries and smart campus initiatives. So we kind of talked about things more generally there, and like what is AWS doing with higher education, like more generally. So check that out if you missed it, or if you're curious, it's up there already. And then so our first few meetings, we've been talking about gathering use cases in the community. So like sort of what are people doing with cloud deployment, like sort of just the members going around talking about our experiences, those kind of things. We're going to be talking about sort of the prior art within the community in terms of like how are people diagramming or making architectures. So there's the Helm charts for Hyrax and Haiku in the Hyrax repository for Kubernetes. And there's also some work recently on new racks to be built and deployed using Terraform into the AWS environment. So there's some like different threads happening. And so our group is going to try to pull all those threads together. And we meet on the fourth Wednesday of every month at 3 p.m. Eastern. Our next meeting is May 24th, I believe, the fourth Wednesday. And one last thing I want to say is just a big thank you to Heather Greer-Klein for getting the working group going. Like, I'm the facilitator, but I sort of came on after the fact, after the group was already sort of ramping up. So just extra shout out. Thank you, Heather, for getting this group going. That's it. Thanks so much.
Thanks very much, Brendan. Next up, we have Kai Stroud from softservedbyscientists.com to talk about the Samvera Developer Onboarding Working Group. Kai?
Okay, everybody should see some slides. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Great. All right. Hello, everybody. My name is Kai Stroud. I'm the current facilitator of the Samvera Developer Onboarding Working Group. My pronouns are he, him. The goals of our working group are to create documentation and other resources designed to help Samvera development teams onboard a developer who has no Samvera experience, and then also create plans to ensure this documentation can stay up to date via scheduled reviews and updates. A lot of the things we've talked about are consolidating various places where documentation currently exists into fewer locations, and then also trying to focus on locations where the documentation is easy to update and maintain as far as being able to keep up with those goals. Here are our current members: Kate Sewell of SoftServe, Julie Hardesty of Indiana University, Heather Greer-Klein, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, and also myself. These are some areas that we've identified as being focal points for this working group in no particular order. We've discussed that all of these locations we would like to point to each other so that if you don't find something in one location, you can find it in another. And then also, again, our target audience is mostly repository managers and those considering Hyrax, and then also DevOps persons who are responsible for deploying Samvera applications. So far, our working group, it's relatively new. I'd say at the time of the last Virtual Connect last May, we had just started our first phase, which was mostly a information gathering phase and planning phase. That has been completed. We decided from there that we wanted to start by focusing on the HIREX README. And so we've also completed that phase earlier this year, mostly with the goal of updating outdated information in that README and then also streamlining it to make it, moving some information that was better suited to a different location and then keeping the README much more concise. Currently, we're in phase 3, which is looking at the Samvera knowledge base. We recently polled the community about usage and maintenance. And then I think in our next meeting, we're going to review the feedback that we got and decide how best to move forward, whether that's moving the relevant documentation elsewhere and sunsetting that site, or figuring out a dedicated maintainer, or possibly something else. And then the next step after that will actually be going and implementing those changes. After phase 3, we'll pick the next focus location and then just rinse and repeat. So if you would like to contribute, we're especially interested in supervisors and senior developers who have faced the challenge of developer onboarding, as well as new developers who can, whose insight is really helpful for us to be able to decide what is useful for other new developers to the space. And then obviously anyone else who's interested is more than welcome to join. More eyes and ears are always appreciated. Currently, we're meeting on the second Wednesday of each month from 4 to 5 p.m. Eastern. Our Slack channel is the Developer Onboarding WG channel. And then also we have a page in the wiki.
Thank you very much, Kai. Seeing no questions in the Q&A or other reasons not to move forward, we'll go to the next update on the agenda from the Participation Sustainability Working Group, presented by Kirsten Leonard from Palmy. Kirsten?
Okay. Excuse me, I've got allergies going today, so forgive me if I have a coughing fit in the middle of this. Nothing to do with sustainability there if I can't continue to talk. So for those of you who haven't met me before, I'm Kirsten Leonard. I'm one of the newbies to the Samvera community. I deeply appreciated all the sessions the last couple of days. While we've been a partner for a couple of years, we're a little bit different than many of the founders of the Samvera community. And so we're still trying to figure out our role and our place in all of this. And so I found all of that enormously helpful. I am a new board member as of January 1 of this year, and I also serve on the Communications and Outreach Working Group and the Board Finance Committee. So just a real quick how I even got involved in this project. So I serve as the executive director of a small private library consortia that's partnering with another consortium, the PALSI consortium, to leverage Samvera community work that has been in play for a number of years. To provide an IR solution to our many libraries. We have some big, but a lot of small libraries that couldn't do this on their own. So I'm not a developer. I've had past studies ages ago in Unix and Java, but I do not code today. My talent that I bring to the table, I suppose, is how to leverage community to solve the challenges of our libraries and thrive in this challenging and changing environment. Palmy, our consortium, has committed to deep collaboration, as we call it, where we share staff, collections, and infrastructure, pretty much everything that goes on to provide shared services to our constituents. And then we've extended that to partner with other bodies to be able to do the work that we need to get done. So Palmy and PALSI, but certainly SoftServe, who serves as our developer, they have the development talent and extending our capacity to work together. So as a new member, with maybe a different set of talents, I came into this to try to find out how I might be able to support and sustain this community, because it's something that we are now going to highly depend upon. And I happened to come on the board, I think at the same time where I think some of these questions, now that the Samvera community is about 15 years old, are also thinking about what do we need to do in order to sustain the communities, particularly in the leadership roles that require quite a bit of time commitment to that. Oops. So one of the things I think everybody's aware of, that the amount of work that's being done in this community is enormous. You're working together because you know that it's more powerful to do it together than to do it separately. As our motto currently states, this idea of how to organize ourselves in order to be as efficient and as effective as possible, I think is threaded through a lot of the updates I've seen in terms of the working groups. Kai's group in particular is kind of looking at the key underlying infrastructure that helps the Samvera community progress. So I want to be careful about how we characterize it. This is a collaboration, and everybody's work is needed in order to advance it. I guess one of the objectives behind this draft charter for this working group is to look at capacity gaps. So what's working well, but also looking at where we're having trouble finding leadership capacities. The HireX Tech Lead is one of the centrally funded positions. That's an experiment that's going, and I'll talk about that a little bit more later. But this idea about what is the job that needs to be done and how can we best organize in order to be able to sustain that. And burnout was another one. I think the HireX Tech Lead and others can speak to this more definitively than I can, but clearly the idea is that we have these leadership roles that we need to be able to sustain. Everybody's contributing, and we want to be able to sustain that activity, and then recognizing that burnout is for real in the library community. So what can we do, at least within our Samvera community, to help prevent that burnout? Oops. It's going ahead of me. So while this is still draft, some of the key scoping questions around this are the capacity questions. So what's work is not getting done because we lack capacity? Where do we have trouble getting contributors for and why? What new roles maybe need to be defined in order to increase efficiency or effectiveness across the community? And what support is needed for these leader role contributors? And then understanding a strategy and coordination alignment among the partners and users of Samvera. So I mentioned one of the things is we're haiku. So we're coming at this maybe with a bunch of small libraries, but who look at the Samvera code stack from a different seat than perhaps others do. So all of the institutions that are involved in the Samvera community have core needs about why they're engaged in this product. In this project and in this community. So how are each of those institutions sustaining and prioritizing their own contributions, their own development, their own community, their own technology staff? And how do the Samvera community needs align with those institutional priorities and that willingness to commit staff time to this collaboration? And then the last one is this collaboratively funded positions. In the HireX Tech Lead, how has that impacted the community? How does it benefit the community's capacity, effectiveness, and overall benefit to partners? How's the paid model, the Samvera community paid model compared to an individual institutional contributor approach, especially for these complex roles that require a lot more time devoted every month to move these objectives forward? So there's a number of different pieces to this as we're starting to flesh out kind of like what is the question that we're looking at, and they're all pretty broad in nature. And as I mentioned, while we haven't even completely finished the charter, we're continuing to think about the experiments. In addition to the HireX Tech Lead role, you'll, I'm sure, have noted the effort to collaboratively fund work to be done to get us over the hump on some of the Valkyrization of HireX. And so that pledge drive is to get some central funds to have some dedicated sprints in May and June here that will be coupled with our current process of having developer sprints. So if you're interested in participating in this, we welcome other participants in this. There's a wiki page for it. Just put your name down or contact me or Heather Kirkline. All right, that's it for me.
Thank you very much. The next presentation on the list is from the Samvera End User Documentation Working Group. presented by Jessica Hilt from UCSD. Is Jessica here or someone else from that working group? Right, well, maybe we'll move on then to the Samvera Roadmaps Alignment Group update from Heather Greer-Klein.
Thanks, Nick. Just one sec here. Hi, folks. I'm Heather Greer-Klein. My pronouns are she, her. I'm the Samvera Community Manager. Just going to share a little update from the Roadmaps Alignment Group, which is sort of a unusual, special group when it comes to working in interest groups in our community. So the membership of the Roadmaps Alignment Group is just based on folks' roles in the community, sort of community leadership roles. So we have our product owners for the different Samvera supported technologies, and we have a representative from component maintenance, from Samvera metadata, and then it's vacant right now, but the Samvera repository management interest group is getting started again, which I'm really excited about. You'll hear about that shortly. But they'll have a role as well, and then myself. So this group was created by the Samvera board a couple of years ago. It's gone through a few different iterations, but mostly this group is a way for cross-project collaboration to happen regularly and easily. I also think about this as this is a really important group for me as the community manager. So I see an important part of my role as making sure that I'm aware of what's going on across the technologies and in all of our interest groups. And whenever I identify an opportunity for folks to work together towards the same effort, or if they're working on things that are similar, I want to make sure that they communicate with each other and can work together. So this is a group that really helps me to do that. So lately, since October, when we last gave our update, we meet or check in about every 2 weeks. So I say meet in person maybe once a month, and then once a month we'll do a Slack check-in if we don't have agenda items. These are all busy folks. They're all chairing other groups that meet in addition to their existing roles in their institutions. So we feel like it's important not to meet just to meet. So if all we have are updates, we'll just do an update in Slack, ask each other questions there. And if we have something more substantial to talk through, then we'll meet in person on Zoom, or not in person. I wish we meet on Zoom. So some things that we've been doing, we helped James Griffin find product owners for all the Samvera components. We helped with organizing some of that work. This group helped me figure out the structure for a charter for the Cloud Development Working Group. When I realized that was coming up often enough, I felt like we had to get out in front of it, but wasn't quite sure, didn't quite have the technical skills to sort that out. So these folks helped me. And then while we were moving over the new Rex testing server, this was a great place for me to ask questions and help get that organized. This is also a group that the board can ask questions of, and I can make sure that there's communication between these community leaders and the board and their monthly meeting. I want to highlight that this group also helps out with planning and making sure that there's topics for developer congresses. Developer Congress is open to any developers or testers at any level. It's a great way to learn more about community development, contributing to the community. It's an unconference style, so anyone can bring activities or topics or ideas, good for seasoned or new developers alike, and we have one towards the end of this month. Later in 2023, we're hoping to start working on some of the outcomes of the List of Dreams activity that emerged as part of our strategic planning that we undertook last year as part of the It Takes a Village toolkit, including we would like to write a new white paper. There was a white paper in 2019 for Samvera Technologies, definitely ready to be updated. That needs to wait until after the Valkyrized Hyrax milestone 1 is completed. So if you're able to contribute to that HIRAX Valkyrization effort, either contribute developers or contribute financially to the pledge drive that PALNI is running, that would be wonderful. This is really, really critical work. There's a lot of things we can't do in the community until it starts to move forward. And that's true for the Roadmap Alignment Group as well. So we're on Slack. We have an open channel. You're welcome to jump in and say hello. And that's it from me.
Thanks so much, Heather. The last update is from the Repository Managers Interest Group, presented by Emily Porter from Emory University. Emily?
Hello. I get my screen up here. Just wanted to give a really quick update about the Repository Management Interest Group. Somebody is sharing the wrong presentation. There we go. There we go. We're presenting later today. So, but yes, we are back. We're back from being in a sunsetted state. Very quickly, some of you may be familiar with this group, which used to be around, I think it goes back to at least 2017, perhaps earlier. But this group used to be called the Project and Service Management Group. And then later it became called the Repository Management Group. Unfortunately, it sunsetted about 3 years ago due to just kind of lack of membership. But I was really interested. I really missed this group. So we had a Birds of a Feather session at Samvera Connect, just kind of see if there was still interest in the group. Been pinging the repository management Slack channel, and fortunately, we got enough folks to be interested in starting that up again. So we had our first kickoff meeting last month. Next slide. So we kind of looked at the old charter and kind of the iterations of this group over the years. And what we really want to focus on is less about project management or IT service management frameworks or anything quite that specific, but really think about what are best practices for operating a successful repository. So kind of like the day-to-day life of managing a Samvera repository. We also want to represent use cases and the different user bases for the Samvera products and the features that get developed. So we want to be an input into to help with the product managers for our respective products. And we talked about, we kind of structured a life cycle base for agenda topics. So whether you're in new repository startup mode, are you in an operational repository mode, or are you transitioning a repository? So particularly in the operational repository catalog, we have a really long list of things that we want to talk about already. So we won't be doing this like in sequence, but really more about what's going on in your world right now that you want to talk to other people about. So you're welcome to join us. We'll be starting to post information about kind of what's coming next, what we're going to be talking about. We have landed on a time, which is 1 p.m. Eastern on Mondays. We unfortunately, in part because of what Heather was just describing, a lot of folks are already in so many meetings that it's hard for us to say a particular week of the month, but we're going to be scheduling it month by month. So we have the repository management channel on Slack. You can see the charter and other information on the wiki. We'll send emails to the Samvera community list. And I really want to thank those who volunteered to start us up again. And also thank you to Heather for getting us up and running again. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Emily. And thank you to all of the folks who have presented these updates from working group and interest groups. If you look on Slack, most have put links about documentation about the groups, as well as information on how to get involved and upcoming activities. So please check that out. We are now approaching 12:30, which is when our next presentation is scheduled, which is titled Really Running Haiku, presented by Rob Kaufman from softservebyscientists.com. Rob, are you all set and ready to get started?
This is Jeremy. I'm gonna go ping Rob in Slack, make sure he's available. He might be thinking he has 10 more minutes or something.
Thanks, Jeremy.
Oh, it looks like Rob's having some connection issues.
Hey, there's an unmute button. Sorry about that, y'all. All right, let's get it up and going. I'm Rob Kaufman. I will share my screen in just a moment and we will dive in. I work for SoftServe. I know that none of you guys have heard that word at all in the last 2 days, but I'm really excited to be presenting with you for you today. Let's see if I can get this to do what it's supposed to do. There we go. That one's good. And then kill my video and hit the green button. There we go. Do we see a presentation?
Yes, you do, Rob.
Great. My pronouns are he, him. I highly encourage that if you have questions throughout, that you ask them in the Slack channel. My awesome coworker, Larita, is watching that and she will feed me direct questions so I don't get too distracted by the chatter while I talk, but I do like to do questions as I go. So I divided my talk into essentially 2 parts. One that's about the actual deployment or running of a Haiku application, and 2 that's a little bit about some necessary workarounds today to deal with the fact that not perfectly everything is customizable. Our fundamental goal is that Haiku will be essentially as turnkey as possible. And as with any turnkey solution, there are always sort of steps to get there. So I know we talk a lot about the fact that Haiku is multi-tenant, but to me, that's not actually the most important thing about Haiku. The most important thing about Haiku is that it is a car you can get a set of keys on for and just drive. You don't have to build the car. It doesn't come in a bunch of boxes. That's something that is, fundamentally supposed to be as turnkey as possible. So we currently support a few ways of running Haiku, and these are the most directly supported. If any one of these were to not work, it would be absolutely considered a bug by myself, who's acting currently as the product owner, and by the Haiku community. So the first is running locally via Docker Compose. The second is on a staging server or on a single server using the Docker Compose production.yaml file. We'll talk a little bit about the difference between those 2 files. And the third is in Kubernetes via Helm deploy. And then you can fundamentally run Haiku any way you could run any other Hyrax or Rails application. You would need Solr, you need Fedora, you need Redis, you need a database. It can be MySQL, it can be Postgres. Could be Oracle if you were so inclined. You could run it on a Microsoft SQL database if you want to do that kind of thing. So you have options there. But the first 3 are really the ones that we kind of like fundamentally work to smooth the path on in a regular basis. So those are kind of our goals for deployment. Let's take a quick tour of what those kind of look like in broad strokes. I'm not going to teach you Docker today. There are lots of awesome resources for that kind of thing. But essentially, a Docker Compose file is a YAML file that defines how an application should run on your local machine. So it tells the Docker engine, hey, run these containers in this configuration and connect them together. It's made up of volumes, which are essentially disk spaces, networks, and services, which are kind of the important part. So in order to start the Haiku stack, we need a copy of Zookeeper, we need a copy of Solar Cloud, we need a copy of Fedora, we need a copy of Postgres. Again, you can swap out for other databases as you see fit. Postgres is just the default. We need a web process, which is the actual running Rails application. We need a worker, which is the background tasks. By default, that's Sidekick, though we have found Good Job to be an excellent alternative to Sidekick. And then it does a few little startup things. So as it's starting up, it makes sure that the directories that need to be written to by the running application are writable. And then it runs, makes sure that the Solar configuration has been run. So it preloads your Solar config set, and then creates a Solar core, and then finally runs the DB migrate and DB seeds for you. This is set up to short circuit. So if those things already have been run, it will respond very quickly. And we run Redis. For dev mode only, we also run a copy of the Selenium Chrome container. And that container is used for testing. So when you are running feature specs and actually using a browser, so feature specs with JavaScript activity, they need a browser to run in. When you're in the containers, you can't necessarily easily reach out to your computer to run them. So we run this Chrome container that it can talk to. It gives you a nice uniform setup. You don't have to install special applications on your computer. If you don't have Chrome installed on your computer, it doesn't prevent you from running the tests. It allows you to run all the tests. One neat thing about this is if you have this Docker Compose running, you can, and you use a tool called Dory, which we use to run lots of different applications at the same time. You can go to chrome.haiku.test, port 7900, and you will actually see a in-browser VNC view of the Chrome browser running. So I can watch the tests actually happen. I can put a debug statement in and see the running browser stopped at that location, which is extremely helpful for debugging these kinds of feature specs, which can be particularly tricky to write well. Okay, so the way we run this is essentially we run Docker Compose up web, and that will start all of these various processes. It made all my empty volumes, and it's going to create those containers. We're not going to sit here and watch it start because it takes a few minutes to get everything up and running the first time. One of the reasons I type up web and not just up here is that starts web and all of the processes it depends on. That means I can stop web and restart it again without restarting Fedora or Solar or Redis or the DB, which speeds up the if you need to restart the Rails application. So one of those little development hacks. So that's what running in development looks like. The next thing I want to talk about is what does running in production look like and how is it different? So if we're running on a single box, we can also use Docker Compose. Let's say we make a fairly large EC2 instance, or maybe we have some VMware servers provisioned. And a lot of this is going to look very much the same. The volumes are the same. The network is the same. But one of the things that's fundamentally different, and I'm going to open them so we can look at them side by side. Okay, so on this side, which is my left side, I have the one we looked at first, which is the one for local dev. And on this side, we have the production version. So let's go down to where the web is defined here. And we'll see that these look essentially identical. That's awesome. But if we go back up to the top where we see this star app points to, we'll see that on the development side, we have the information for building the Docker image. So in Docker, you use a Docker file to create a Docker image, and then that gets instantiated as a container to actually run. But in production, we don't want to build the image. We want the image to already be built. So we just use the image tag, and we don't have the build context so that we're not trying to build in our production environment. The other thing that's a critical difference here in the production-like environment is some of these variables have slightly different values that are more production ready. The most important of which is this FC repo one. So in development, we used FC repo running on the file simple mode shape. It is really, really important that you not run file simple in production. If you do, eventually your Fedora instance will become irreparably corrupted, and that's bad. So in production, you want to be pointing at either a MySQL database or Postgres database, and the configuration for that is here. So that's, I think a really crucial piece of the puzzle. I'm a little, if we were doing Fedora 4 over again, we wouldn't, but if we had to, I would definitely say like not making file simple the default would be a really good idea, simply because it's so dangerous if you do accidentally run it in production. All right, so that's the production Docker Compose file. Often on a production server, I'll write an alias that looks kind of like this: alias dc equals docker compose -f docker compose.production.yaml. And that's just because I'm lazy and I don't want to have to type -f docker compose production.yaml over and over again. And that I've gotten pretty used to having DC be my Docker Compose alias. This does write over an existing Unix tool, but it's the one for text-based spreadsheets on the command line, which I don't personally use very often. So that's just sort of how we generally set up if we're running on a single machine. The next piece that I want to talk about is running in Kubernetes. So the Kubernetes deployment sort of assumes that you have a Kubernetes cluster that you're running. There is no way that I have time to cover that in the next 15 minutes. So I'm just that's going to have to be outside the scope of this talk. But the way we deploy our in Kubernetes is essentially a three-part process. You need the script that sets up the Helm arguments, because quite frankly, I'm not typing Helm upgrade install automatic timeout, set these variables, add my extra args, this is the namespace, create namespace, this is the release name, and hierarchs over and over again. I definitely want that to be in a shell script. And this script is provided in the Haiku repository in bin Helm deploy. Then the next piece, oops, got a little fast there, is your the piece to actually deploy it. And so what this is a snippet of a GitHub action that we use for that. It says to set the values for the Helm deployment to demo deploy.yaml in this case. We use this to distinguish between staging, demo, production type environments. We start with the template file and we substitute the environment. So I'm going to show you one of these -deploy temple.yaml files and show you how they substitute. There's a little hacky trick here where we set $= $, and I'll show you that and why that works. And then lastly, here are some environment variables, and then here's where we call bin Helm deploy. This one will be Rob's Haiku and Haiku demo. So again, we usually have these as a GitHub action. And then lastly, there is the chart itself and its values file. So let's look at the chart. This chart is essentially a set of YAML files that are templates that get used by the Helm command line tool to tell the Kubernetes cluster, this is what I want my application to look like. Helm is a very, very common deployment method in Kubernetes land. And we specifically point to and use the hierarchs Helm chart for deploying Haiku. This means that any maintenance that the Haiku team puts in to maintaining the chart and deployment goes straight into hierarchs for everyone to use. It doesn't really cause a lot of difference because Haiku is essentially just a hierarchs application. And so, one uniform set of deployment tools means that we're not maintaining two separate deployments. And then the last piece of this puzzle is the values file. Let me pull open the staging one of those. So one little trick we do, and I'll show you here first, is this imsubst. Imsubst is a command line Unix tool that is fairly old that basically reads any file and replaces any environment variables with their values. So for example, I can pass base URL, is that set in my environment, this gets filled in with the value from the outside. What this ultimately means is I can set this at my CI level or on my local machine, and these values get kind of filled in as we go. You can see that there are a lot of environment variables that are configurable around Haiku. Haiku very much subscribes to the 12-factor methodology, which means that most configuration options are available in the outside world. And in fact, specifically, all admin options for a Haiku instance are settable as defaults from an environment variable. So for example, if we allow sign up is a feature flag that can be set on a per tenant basis. So I can have one tenant that allows sign up and another tenant that does not. But the default, if I don't go to the setting, is false because of this Haiku allow sign up variable setting. So all of our admin options are settable as defaults in this way at the environment level. So you can see there's quite a few here. In a recent Haiku release, we renamed almost all of the environment variables to match exactly what Hyrax is using in an effort to, again, reduce the mental overhead and separation between those things. So Hyrax's environment variable set and Haiku's environment set is a superset now of Hyrax's environment set. We can specify how many workers we want. We can specify whether we're deploying Fedora, Postgres, and Redis, or whether they're already running. If they're already running, we need to set the host values for those. In our staging and demo setup, we run a single Fedora, a single Postgres, and a single Solr. And so we just point at the existing deployments of those. We don't create a new one for every Haiku app we deploy. So there's a lot of interesting configuration in here. I told you I would explain why we do dollar equals dollar. So msups replaces all of the dollar signs with their environment variable values. The Nginx configuration uses the dollar sign as one of its internal formats for the config. So in order to get around that, we essentially replace this dollar curly bracket, dollar close curly bracket with a single dollar sign as the environment substitution. So it's just a little hack to get around a kind of a lack of features in env subs as we kind of sub out this file. So this results ultimately in a value file. It's just a simple YAML file that's passed into the Helm chart for deployment. There are a ton of options here, which is why we provide you with a clear set of examples in the Haiku code base. So you can kind of take this and make it your own. All right. There's your whirlwind about deploying. Let's talk about changing Haiku. So many of us have pretty customized Hyrax applications, and we have those features that we desperately wish we had time to commit back, but we often don't. What I want to talk about now is a structure for developing Haiku that can make that easier. I want to commit to working with you to get your code merged. If you have a feature that's generally applicable, put it up as a PR. If it doesn't have enough test coverage or you're embarrassed about this one method, like let's talk about that. Let's have a conversation about how we can get things to where they need to be in order to get them merged. And we will try and make it as painless as possible. If it's commonly applicable, but not really everyone's going to want it, then we'll put it behind a feature flag. Let's still get it merged in. Let's still make it part of the code base where we can, so that we're not all keeping a separate fork of Haiku for every single application that we're doing. And then if you think the idea is just half-baked or needs a lot of refining, put it up as a draft PR. Let's have conversations about it. Maybe someone on my team needs to build that feature for another project. We'll pick up the work you already started and carry it across the finish line. And then we both get to have a fully refined feature in the future. So we really want to encourage development in the Haiku space itself and not in separate forks wherever possible. And I want to be clear here, we have been pretty guilty of this separate fork problem in the past. And so this is some thinking and discussion about ways that we can get away from that on our projects, but also for all of the projects in the community. I think there's a ton of discussion around collaboration It's always a challenge. I think this is a way to do it. So give me your tired, your poor, your huddled ideas, yearning to breathe free, the refuse of your teaming issue board. Put it up there. I promise you will not be judged. You will be met with kindness and understanding. All right. But what about the things I can't just have generally applicable right now? Themes, work types, and truly custom things that are unique to my platform. Those things exist fundamentally. And so I want to talk about some methodologies for developing with those things. The other thing that's true is you probably have some customization needed for your deployment. Forking Haiku and customizing it can be difficult to maintain. Merging new versions in becomes hard. You become sort of dead-ended a little bit on what you can do to bring in new code, and you lose out on some of the community collaboration. So what we're proposing to do is to create an engine that holds any themes, deployment logic, custom work types, or other customizations, and keeps a clear separation of those between the existing Haiku set and custom code. This essentially provides a plugin architecture very similar to how WordPress themes and like WordPress plugins are deployed. Don't be afraid to have a branch of Haiku where you're working on features. You can push those up. If you don't make a PR for it, no one's probably ever going to notice. So it's not something you need to necessarily worry about other than making sure you don't put any secrets in the code. So that's a safe thing that you can do. And then honestly, the fact that we need this structure is a bug to me. I think ultimately, I would like theme packs to be easily installable from a link. I would like work types to be customizable through uploadable schemas. And I think that the more we can drive out the deployment logic into variables and a values file, the less we have to have this whole like maintenance of a thing. So it isn't going to be instant to fix those things. The themes are awesome and they're very full featured, but they're not perfect and they don't encompass everything yet. And so, and they don't necessarily have an easy like point and click interface for adding a new theme to a Haiku tenant. So we're working on that. Selecting a theme that exists, absolutely, that's point and click, but actually uploading an external one, that's not there yet. And then work types. At this point, we have Balance and Flex, which does give you that YAML-based uploading and modification of your work types. There's some work to be done to then bring that up to Valkyrie and merge that in with some of the work that the Surfliner folks have done and that others have done in other projects, and get us to a point where we have a nice user interface for maintaining our work schemas, and that we're not relying on the sort of built into a class, you have to edit 8 or 10 files in order to have working work types that we have today. So we're moving out of that in Hyrax as a whole, but again, we're not there right this minute. So I'm working on a new template for these sorts of projects. It's forthcoming and it needs a name. So right now I'm calling it Haiku Sprouts, but I am going to try and put a poll out. Actually, let's just start a thread in the Connect channel with name ideas. So this is the engine that sort of wraps around a Haiku install in order to kind of be your individual customizations or deployment or theme for that. So ChatGPT and I had a long conversation about it yesterday. My team's been brainstorming some ideas, which I think we'll try and copy over into the thread at this point. But I'd love to get an awesome name for this engine concept. And I want to be clear that I'm ripping this idea off completely from Chris Kolovar. This idea of structure, it comes from the Haiku add-ons repository that Ubiquity maintains. This is 100% the method that Chris came up with in his team for solving this problem when they realized how separated their Haiku had gotten from the main line. So all credit goes to that team for this idea. And we are looking to adopt this structure also because it's really brilliant. I think that the idea is a powerful one and that it leads to more community collaboration, which I think is super important. Tell me what you think. This is not an idea that is actively being practiced on all of our application deployments yet. We have a lot of Haikus running around. And so we want to bring that in together, make that a little more maintainable over time, and also make sure that we work very hard to get as much back into the community as we can to streamline that process and make it as pain-free as possible. All right, unless anyone else has questions, I appreciate your time.
Thank you very much, Rob. And thanks everyone for contributing to the discussion on the Connect channel as well. And you can tune in there and add your name ideas for the theme customization, which that thread has already started. So we are already in our break time, and we're scheduled to resume at 1 p.m. in 4 minutes. Heather, is that still the schedule we'd like to adhere to?
Yeah, that's totally fine. We can have a slightly longer break, no problem.
Well, the schedule means that we're going to have a break for 4 minutes and then start at 1. So,
Oh, sorry,
yeah.
sorry. I had that flipped around. Yeah, let's go ahead and take a short break. Go ahead and take a 4-minute break.
We'll see you all in 4 minutes. All right, welcome back. We're now at the next presentation, 1 p.m. Eastern time, piloting a migration from Fedora 3 to Fedora 6 in Samvera, presented by Emily Porter and Brad Watson from Emory University. So Emily and Brad.
Hi, everyone. While Brad's getting our screen set up, I'm Emily Porter. I'm the Digital Repository Program Manager at the Emory Libraries. And my colleague Brad Watson from our software engineering team is here with us as well. You go to the next slide, please. There we go. So this is kind of a meaty topic, and you may be wondering what's going on. So to give some overview of kind of our repository environment, or I should say environments, we've been a Samvera adopter for a while now, and we do have 2 HierarX applications that are backed with Fedora 4. However, we also have a very large amount of information or content that's still in Fedora 3. We ultimately are very interested in getting up to Fedora 6 and also having a HierarX interface to Fedora 6. So the question is, how do we get there? What does this look like? There are 2 known pathways for upgrading or migrating to Fedora 6. And one is got more steps, as you can see. So that's going from 3 to 4, then 4 to 5, and then 5 to 6. There is also, however, a direct 3 to 6 migration utility that's been released by the Fedora community. So we spent a little time thinking about this and decided the best way to learn about this would be to do a pilot. Can we go to the next slide? So our migration pilot, we made a few decisions right away. And one is that we did want to try that 3 to 6 route. We also wanted to look at Valkyrie and the Valkyrie Fedora 6 adapter, as opposed to looking at active Fedora, in the hopes that this might get us better support within HierarX more quickly. So to do this, we're basically doing an extract and load process through those migration utilities. This also converts our data into OCFL, which is the Oxford Common File System layout, which we're very interested in working with. And then we're really have a lot of question marks about what kind of transformations do we have to do to this data so that it can be interacted with through Samvera gems. And so really the kind of end goal of this pilot, which is not a very long-term effort, unfortunately, we have limited time to work on this right now, but we want to see if we can get at least read capability, not necessarily full-blown support within a HierarX interface. And then we also really want to do some assessment of how much work is this going to be, kind of what level of support is there in Samvera gems right now? How much work do we need to do locally? What else is involved for community work for others who might be interested in moving to Fedora 6? Next slide, please. So I'll go back in time here a little bit. Many of you maybe remember what Fedora 3 looks like. Maybe you've never even seen it. But back in the day, Fedora 3 objects are essentially a series of files. So the metadata itself is typically stored in XML files. And then we have the content file as well. So these are called data streams, but they are essentially binary files. So the kind of common metadata schema across any Fedora object will be DC, which is a Dublin core file that has kind of minimal description in it. And also this rels-ext file, which is a Fedora managed file that contains information, kind of like PCDM in a way, more of a structural entity. And then we also have richer descriptive metadata stored in a mods XML file. And then we have preservation metadata, which is essentially a premise metadata file stored in this provenance metadata data stream. And then you can also see the object identifier toward the top of the screen. And that's an arc value prefixed with emery. Next slide, please. So the first thing we wanted to do was just kind of take a small set of data, run it through the migration process, and see what we got on the other side of that. So we set up a brand new Fedora 6 instance, and we kind of researched the migration utilities. Again, we identified a very small set. I think it was 10 or 12 objects. We ran the migration utility on those selected IDs. This is also a nice benefit of the migration tool. If you want to do a pilot like this, you don't have to migrate your entire repository. You can just feed in a set of IDs that you want to work with. We did find that we had to restart and reindex Fedora 6 to make that new data visible. And then we could see that the objects migrated into a flat structure at the root of the Fedora 6 instance. And I'll show you what that looks like in a minute. And each of those data streams that I just showed came across attached as direct children for each of those work objects, essentially. And then we saw that, there was kind of very minimal RDF property that was auto-populated for each object. And that was basically all the RDF that was defined in the rels-x XML file. So basically Fedora's managed metadata. And then we also played around with the Fedora migration validator tool. We're still getting a handle on that to see what the best options are for us there. And so this is our first pass of a migration, but we're also planning to do at least one more run of this during our pilot. So we'll probably do something closer to 100 objects next time. Next slide, please. So here is what the data looked like when we ran it just directly through that migration utility. And so what we see, we have 12 children up at the root of Fedora. Each of those Fedora 3 PIDs came right over as the Fedora 6 identifiers. Next slide, please. And then if we drill down into one of these objects, and again, so this, for those of you who've seen or worked with Fedora 4, this looks pretty similar. But each of those files that I was showing you earlier came across as direct children of that parent object. So they're one-to-one with, we have that PID ID /DC, PID ID /content, etc. And this work level object is stored as a Fedora basic container, but each of those children are being migrated over as binary containers. So we can see some minimal RDF properties here, but obviously we're not seeing anything that looks like PCDM. We're not seeing anything that looks like Hyrax. And we're also not seeing all of our richer descriptive metadata that's contained in those files. Next slide. And so now I'm going to hand it over to my colleague Brad, who's going to talk about the prototyping that we've done to work with that data.
Hello, all. As far as the work is concerned, it moved pretty fast. We started off with some test objects that were uploaded manually before we had a migration, which I went ahead and started to work with as far as the bare bones Rails application using Valkyrie, was concerned. Then we moved on to the migrated data and worked up how to bring in that metadata that Emily just went and spoke of. We are currently working to basically push past to 3. We are almost basically wrapped up with version 1 and 2. But I will go ahead and get you to that point here with the slides. One of the things that we had to do to go and get Valkyrie to work with our bare bones Rails app was to get the objects in as a Ruby object instead of just plain hashes. And I would like to thank Trey Pendragon for basically pointing to, as well as helping me get to that point, which is basically this code inside of Valkyrie.rb as initializer. Basically treats everything as a Valkyrie object that comes in. And Valkyrie object is basically something that we created on the fly while he was looking over my code. There is a link to the original Valkyrie code location of this. So if you do want to go ahead and explore that and see how things have changed, you can definitely explore that there after the presentation. And yeah, this is a screenshot, but you will definitely see the live presentation here soon. Just a comment here. I asked in Slack basically how snazzy the site should look. Should I go for just a plain bootstrap type of approach? And I think Emily did say just slightly better than GeoCities, and I took her seriously. This is somewhat of the look, and I will get you to that next point here. But this is a working instance of Valkyrie reading the values out and also being able to show the predicate and the value. And this is, one piece of a migrated object in this situation. Before we did have RDF metadata attached. Let's go ahead and move on. And just a precursor, this is kind of my outline for the demo, which I'll be switching into just momentarily. You can refer back to this to go ahead and follow along with the video. I'm just wondering, where we're at that point. I will circle back to the work in progress, but let me escape out of the portion here and show you the live page. So yeah, as you can see, some of these elements are requested. The unicorn is not my idea, but it was appreciated by a lot of people, and counters as well as icons and MIDI, which I will not play here. But I will go ahead and detail how we are able to pull the label information from the migrated Valkyrie objects as the full list comes in. So we are able to go ahead and get title, or as it's marked in our OpenEmory test data as label. And if you will see too that we have since been able to add in metadata from both DC as well as mods, which is the desk metadata object. So we were able to go ahead and pull it in, persist it to the actual Fedora 6 objects. So Valkyrie is definitely helping us with that as well. And in this situation, we are also providing links which are kind of formed dynamically to download the anything attached to the objects, the children there. Basically, I can show you the process of how this can happen. Right now, this object only has DC metadata already applied. If we just go ahead and click this, it will go ahead and provide more, which includes the mods as well as a couple of fields that were missing from DC present in mods that we can go ahead and therefore display here. Over here is the processing, and one of the big questions was how much work do we have to do to actually get this going? And I don't have too large of a records controller, and most of the processing is located right here. So not much work at all. Playing around with Valkyrie to go ahead and get the things we need. But this does go ahead and lead on to our next bit of work, which is to attempt to take anything that's considered to be content value from an object like this. In our case, it would be the bin files, content, the province metadata, as well as I believe symplectic license, I think, as well as the audit portion, and go ahead and pluck those out of each object in much the same way that we do with the button here, and save them as a file set type of object to the root level of our Fedora instance. So going back to home, it should show up in the list here. And I have been playing around with that, but so far I have run into issues with Valkyrie storage adapters interplay. I've noticed that since I'm using Rails 7 and Ruby 3, that there seems to be a requirement missing in one of the Valkyrie's core functions, the storage function pages. I've had to patch that. And I've also had to deal with certain situations where Valkyrie actually does persist the object into the main list, but reports back that it was not successful in the process. So I had to overcome those steps here. Let me get back to the presentation. And pardon me. Move on here. And I will mute, and you're taking back over. Emily, is that correct?
Yes. Cool. So that's kind of where we are right now. We were wondering what on earth we'd be presenting about, but that's where we are. And so kind of what's next for us? Well, again, once we get through, we've got maybe a couple more months to work on this. Once we come to the end of our project timeline, we want to do an overall assessment. So how well did the data migrate? And really think about how much work do we have ahead for a full migration and hierarch support? And is that direct 3 to 6 strategy the best approach for us? So far, so good. We also want to write up a lot of documentation about what kind of data remediation needs we need moving forward. We want to document all the infrastructure and architecture for this environment so that we can rebuild it in the future. And also, we'd love to share lessons learned from other Fedora 6 adopters if folks are interested. And sadly, we will have to sunset this gorgeous prototype that we built. We're trying not to get too attached to it, but at the end of the day, we don't want to get too invested in it because we're going to have to recreate all this in the future. But I also want to say, if you're also interested in working with Fedora 6, we'd love to hear from you and would love to connect with you. And that's it for us. If Brad, can you move to the next slide? Yeah, so we just want to say thank you. Here is our contact information and Samvera Slack. I want to thank the Emory Migrationeer team, our scholarly communications team, who are the content stewards for the data that we migrated. Thank you to Trey Pendragon for helping us. And also thank you, Aaron Griffith and the Fedora 6 community for all the great work they've been doing.
Thank you so much, Emily and Brad. If there are any questions, we only have about a minute before our next one. Looks like there is a question in the chat here, which is, have you guys decided for sure to go the Valkyrie route versus the active Fedora route?
I think so. I mean, at least for this pilot, that's what we're doing.
Thank you. And I might say for the record, for this recording, that the chat in Slack and the feelings about the design of this prototype can be best characterized as pure joy, and would love to see it preserved or live on in some other way. And thank you so much for sharing that with us.
Thank you.
Okay, well, we're now at 1:20. And we're on to some lightning talks, which consist, or some short presentations, which consist of lightning talks and some updates. And the first one on the schedule is the Fedora community update presented by Aaron Griffin from Lyrasis.
Hey, all right. Let's see. Is that right? Do we have?
Yep, looks great.
Yeah, we're good there.
Yep.
Okay, awesome. So I will do my best here to move through this. But hi, thanks for having me. I'm the program manager at Fedora, as mentioned. I'm here today just to give a kind of brief update on what the community is up to, talk a little bit about what we're working on and what we have planned for the future. I've kind of called this presentation what we're doing, what we tried, what's working and what's not, because I think a lot of those things are, really important pieces about what makes the Fedora community so strong and so robust in what we do. So our willingness to try new things, but then also the way that we've approached challenge and, what we learn from those challenges to kind of do things differently the next time around. So this is really quickly the current state of the community. We're on version 6.4, which was released not that long ago. This update was some minor bug fixes, as well as updates to the migration validator and the migration utils, which are those tools that Emily just talked about that were built from the IMLS grant that aids from migrations from Fedora 3 to Fedora 6. 6.4 also has updates to the latest version of the newest OCFL specification, so the Oxford Common File Layout. From the Fedora side of things, we're happy to report that all migration pathways from previous versions of Fedora are open now to 6. So the grant work specifically was targeting 3 to 6 migrations. However, there does exist a pathway from 4 to 6. It's a little more complicated, but there is documentation. It is possible, and we have seen it done. There's roughly 350 known installations from around the world of Fedora, and we are learning of new installations, people spinning up new instances of Fedora 6 and reaching out. And this is happening a lot more frequently, which is awesome for us, thanks to some new outreach efforts. Last year, just briefly, we made some temporary modifications to our governance structure and our governance group, and we now are operating under one unified governance group instead of a separate leadership and steering group. And this has really given us the opportunity to bring better representation to the table and the decision-making table, especially during this critical post 6.0 release period, where leadership really needed to be present and engaged and help with advocacy and adoption of the new software. So we've been really focused on working collectively in kind of like a tight-knit group. And we've also been working on streamlining some of our communication channels. So to meet our community members where they are, lower the frequency of certain things, really to strike that right balance between engagement without overwhelming people. So this is the what we've tried and what we're doing part of the talk. If you do follow along in any of our communication channels, you've likely seen many of these things that are listed here. So I don't want to dig in too deeply, but essentially what happened is, we released 6.0. We realized that there wasn't a super extensive technology roadmap. So we built 6 based on some extensive community feedback and input as kind of a solution to things that were maybe less than ideal about previous versions of the software. We wanted to get people back into a version of Fedora that felt like, their really beloved version of Fedora 3. But beyond that, we hadn't really considered what we were going to do past 6.0. So we spent a year doing some very intentional strategic planning with governance and key stakeholders from the community. And the outcomes of that work are being actioned now. And, we're following up on a lot of the recommendations that were made from the strategic planning there. But one of the most important things that we have done is these community information gathering sessions. So we've done them twice now. And when I say we, I mean governance, the program team, and we've done them to ensure that we're hearing from the community. So oftentimes we would start these community information gathering sessions when we're unsure of how to proceed, or we're not sure what the majority of our community members think or want on a particular topic. So the first round we did in 2021, which was right around the time that we were releasing 6. And the purpose of this was to understand when and if folks were going to migrate. So we wanted to be prepared for this mass onslaught of migrations, but we also needed to learn about institutional use cases, find out what versions people were on, and we wanted to hear from people that weren't just in administrative type roles. We wanted to hear from, we extended the invitation to developers, metadata librarians, people that would actually have hands-on, be touching the software regularly, so we could get their perspective on things. A lot of times at governance, it is administrative or higher level, and so we needed the technologists to come and tell us about what they were doing. So this for us was a really great pulse check on the community to see where everybody was at and what their plans look like for the future. We're now in the midst of a second round of these information gathering sessions, and this one is more focused on helping to build that future technology roadmap for Fedora. And we're not talking like immediate future, but this is for us a way to listen to our users and understand how we can focus our work for the best interest of the community as we think, beyond 6.0 once we get the majority of the community there. So a lot of times we think we might need one thing, or as the group of governance, we have a need, but maybe that need doesn't speak to the entire community. So we can't assume that what we want. We need to give the community members this opportunity to come and talk and outline their use cases. So we've done 3 of 6 of these scheduled technology sessions. There's a link at the end of the slide. If you haven't participated in one and you would like to, registration is still open and there's lots of space. So the more voices we can hear from, really the better. And another thing that we've done is gone back to conferences to meet users face to face. So I'm sure everybody here knows that the value of an in-person meeting and the hallway conversations that you have is so much more deep than a virtual conference. You get an opportunity to hear things a little bit differently and engage with users. So we plan to do more of that, to get back to as many key conferences, to share user stories, talk about work being done by community members, and really just being available to meet people. We've also been working on providing some non-technical involvement opportunities for the community. So we've done some things like adjusting our tech meetings to make it more inclusive and inviting individuals to come and ask questions who maybe feel like they're not tech savvy enough to come and participate in something like a tech meeting. We also offer now a monthly open office hours, which accommodates different time zones so that we're available to our community and our users in different ways. There's also things like a wiki and website working group, which is a nice way for community members to get involved. It doesn't involve development, and engaging with our members in different ways by collaboratively writing some special topics blog posts about their institutional use cases, migration efforts, things like that. We also wrapped up the IMLS grant, so the migration toolkit is now available on the Fedora Wiki. And then we're focused on some community-driven feature development. So this is stuff that has come back through those information gathering sessions, through some community surveys. I don't want to call it low-hanging fruit because it is certainly involved, but this is things that have been specifically asked for by community. So obviously there have been speed bumps though. This is the what didn't work part maybe. Like I was mentioning, we had this idea that once 6 was released, everyone was just going to migrate to it right away. We could start thinking beyond that, start thinking of what 7 might look like. But we learned very quickly in those initial information gathering sessions that there's just so many other factors involved in migrations that we can't dictate when migrations happen. So we need to be available, and we need to make sure as a community that we're offering the right support for people when they're ready to go. It's obviously a long process and it's not going to happen overnight. So making sure that we're prepared and ready to support our users when they need it. We've also had some significant technology staff turnover within the program in the last year. I think we've definitely had some really great voices come in. We've seen some familiar Fedora faces unfortunately leave us, but that kind of poses its own problem in that these people hold such strong and deep institutional knowledge. So right now we're very focused on intentionally sharing and trying to spread out that Fedora specific knowledge so that this is going to serve us for the long term, right? We know that it's inevitable that people will rotate and people will move on, but we need to make sure there's not a knowledge gap when they do. And the last thing I just want to say briefly is acknowledging the past while continuing to look forward. So being okay with saying, you know what, that didn't work, or maybe that was a wrong decision, but then ensuring that what we do next is based on the learning from, the past mistake. And I think the biggest thing here for us that we've learned is really going back to the community, involving the community, listening to what people are saying, the good, the bad, and the ugly, if I've met you at a conference and you were hesitant to say something negative about community, we can't change if we haven't heard it. So you need to not be afraid to come forward with that feedback, because we can't make change without it. So as we're working on planning for the future of Fedora, we want to get it right. So really hearing the community out in as many ways as possible. So this is really kind of briefly what we have planned. I'm not going to go into it too deeply here. The slides will be available. That community technology development that we're working on, some more community engagement opportunities. But these are things that we have on the slate. I do want to share this with you though, and just show, that we've been patient and this list continues to grow all the time. And we're so excited about this. So this is current users operating versions of Fedora 6 right now. That list has grown. It's probably doubled in the last few months, which is great to see. We do have an ongoing list of folks that are migrating to Fedora 6. And so if you have interest in or want to connect with any of these users, they have also graciously offered to connect and talk about their migration story. So just reach out to me and I can connect you. Some resources and anything that you need there. And lastly, I just wanted to thank you for the time. And you've got my email address, so you can reach out whenever you need.
Thank you so much for this update, Erin. Any questions before we move on? The next presentation, lightning talk, will be presented by Kevin Kochansky from SoftServe by Scientist.com, titled Feed the Samvera Tree, a Path for Developer Training. Kevin?
Thanks, Nick. Let me get this shared. Looking good?
Looks great.
Cool. It'd be nice if I was at the beginning instead of the end. Close your eyes. Okay, so coin name only because about 10 years ago, I played way too much rock band and sang the belly song, Feed the Tree, a lot. But it'll make sense. It'll make sense. This is me talking to the community about something that SoftServe has planned, which is the Samvera Developer Training Workshops for 2023. And this is about growing the tree, responding to a Samvera community need. Having new qualified developers in the space is absolutely essential to sustaining the community. The idiosyncrasies of the technology are a barrier to progress for individual institutions and community growth in general. And documentation and other training resources are currently inadequate to have somebody just kind of jump in and learn the Samvera ways. And that's understandable with open source. This is something that comes up once in a while, most recently in the in-person partners call, talking about ways to keep growth going in the community and sustain it, making sure that the talent is in the community. So SoftServe's response to this and our way of contributing is to present the Samvera Developer Training Workshops. Our goals here are to provide a path for institutions and organizations to train up new developers in Samvera space and enable them to be more self-reliant, to benefit the community at large by equipping more developers with skill sets to support the technology and to sustain the community, and to reinforce the support network, not just between the community developers and SoftServe, but between one another via collaboratively working. And this does pick up, SoftServe has heard from a lot of folks in the community. We have some clients who have come to us and said, we lost our Hyrax developer, or we are exploring this and don't quite have everything we need. We've got the team on staff, but not the expert knowledge. So this is really designed to help people get across the curve. And a lot is due to data curation experts and their Samvera camp that has not occurred for several years. And this is our way of helping to bring something like that back to the community. The curriculum that we have defined may undergo some changes, but is not likely. We came up with this with our Samvera developers on staff and talked to some folks in the community and did some reprioritization. And we're looking at an initial series of 10 workshops that would be on Samvera specific skills. And I will keep the slide up here because there's a lot of information, but just talking through roughly the 10 that we're looking at is spinning up a Samvera app, a session on work types and creating and customizing those, a session on customizing search capabilities and facets, theming challenges that are specific to Samvera and UI changes, Bulk Rack's intro. Bulk Rack's dives pretty deep, but we're looking at kind of a part 1 beginner session dealing just with the CSV format, custom mappings and error resolution, testing specific to Samvera, maintenance and support security issues that Samvera apps need attention to. Gems, another really big topic, but we're going to focus this session on the DOI gem and the OAI gem. General development best practices in the space, and then deploying to AWS. If this goes well, if this is well received, we already have ideas planned for a second set, maybe in the spring, but one thing at a time. The format that we are looking at here, you may or may not know that Rob Kaufman co-founded a coding bootcamp, Learn Academy, and it's in its 9th year going strong. And that format is that the instructor would come in and present, demo, and teach for maybe an hour, and then the next several hours the students are pairing together to really reinforce what they've learned and practice it in real time, and rely more on each other to try to solve problems than just raising their hand and getting attention unless they need to get unblocked on something. So we're kind of setting this up the same way. It's going to be virtual. It won't be online. People don't have to fly across the country. We will be using a collaborative webinar tool, and each workshop will start with a session of demo code walkthrough, a lecture by a self-serve developer who specializes in that topic. The instructors will change depending on the topic and availability. It's going to be followed then by hands-on workshop. So people, the attendees will pair together with coding exercises to implement what they've learned. And like I said, we will have people working in pairs or small mobs, depending on the number of folks, to collaborate and try to do as much of their own problem solving and really learn from doing that way. Our developers, the instructor and other developers will be available all day, checking in for questions, blockers, review. And we also plan to schedule probably 2 office hours following each session, so that once folks kind of go back and think about it or try it at home and they reach a blocker or have other questions that come up, there'll be a space for them to do that. Just a few things. We will be using the Haiku code base, which will cover all of the applicable Samvera things. As you know, Haiku is built on Hyrax, so all the right pieces will be there. This is a developer-focused workshop. So this is not about how do I use this as a library administrator. It's about how do I, as a developer and engineer, interact with this code. So participants, we are assuming they will be a Rails developer that might be new to Samvera, or as long as they're learning Rails, this won't be a Ruby on Rails course. And we will, of course, share this with people who register, but we'll ask folks to watch the Samvera 101 presentation that just kind of lays the groundwork for a lot of these topics. We're going to do this in fall, likely Wednesdays. Our current schedule has them Wednesdays, once a week, from September 6th to November 15th. And that's 11 weeks, 10 sessions, because Samvera Connect is in there, so we'll skip a week for that. This schedule was designed to minimize the impact of other, people can keep doing their job and step out for this 1 day a week, as opposed to, attending a 2-week course or something like that. And the timing was also arrived at in consultation with some university administrator folks who thought that this would fit best for their technical teams. So hopefully that's the right target. And we do have the stipulation that if we don't have at least 6 registrants, we cannot hold the sessions. It just won't be sustainable. So we have enough interest in this that we think that won't be a problem, but just putting that out there. We have the costs set for the series of all 10. If we're in the position, if we have enough folks to register for all of them, we may be able to offer individual workshops. So we'll stay in communication about that. You know, somebody that might be a Samvera developer for 5 years, but not know anything about bulk racks, just wants to come to that session, we'll try to make that work. And we're messaging this now because we know that you may be dealing with having a little bit of budget to spend before the end of June, or planning what you're going to spend your budget on in, you know, the next fiscal year. So we just wanted to get this message out now. So what to do? I do have a form. I tried to pick the short link, but it's still not human readable. So that's nothing you can easily memorize, but there is a sign up form. It's not a commitment. It doesn't make you send money. It just kind of like puts you in the system so we can count on your attendance. And then, you know, we'll wrap up the logistics once we absolutely finalize the schedules and the topics and deal with, you know, how to invoice your institution. So don't be afraid to sign up, even if you're not 100% sure. I've also got a link to a summary of this information, and I will put these links in the Connect chat immediately after I'm done talking. And you can always send me an email. So I'm Kevin Kochansky at scientist.com. If you need more information on this, if you need something to show your financial office to say this is worthwhile, we can put something together for you. If you have some interest, but just really want to make sure you're kept in the loop, feel free to let me know. And if you have any other questions, of course, you can send those over to me. We will continue to update the Samvera community list and Samvera Slack for reminders and other updates. So this, don't feel like if you didn't write everything down right now, you've missed your chance, because you haven't. And just kind of recapping all of those things while I say thank you and show this one final slide. I really liked this template. I found it and I embellished it with some little Samvera trees that kind of fit right in. And you might see more of this one because I thought it was cool. All right. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks so much, Kevin. There was one question in Slack that maybe you can answer now. To clarify, how much Rails experience do participants need to have before the workshops?
That's a good question. And I would say that if anybody wants to reach out to me to just kind of talk about that as a specific case scenario, we'll be happy to walk through it. I just generally applicable, we won't be teaching Ruby on Rails. We'll just be teaching Samvera skills that, you know, are required to be productive in Samvera applications. So anybody that's kind of working towards the Rails journey or has some familiarity with it, it should be fine. If you are kind of developing in Samvera, but just need to know some other things, then you're on the right page for this.
Thanks so much, Kevin. We'll move on now to our next talk, which is the Valkyrie Community Update presented by Alexandra Dunn from UCSB. Alexandra.
Hi, thank you. And thank you, and apologies to Heather for rescheduling this from yesterday. This shouldn't be very long. There's not a huge amount to go over, I don't think. So I'll just quickly share what has been released in the Valkyrie space. So we finally pushed out the full 3.0 release since my last update. So nothing groundbreaking, but we do have full support for Ruby 3, and we have now dropped support for Ruby 2.5 and earlier. There are previous changes in the 3.0 betas that I went over in my last update. So I will link the release list in Slack if you want to review those. So we don't, let's see, I think I will just point out one thing. In the initial beta, we began testing against Fedora 6. I think Trey might be able to give us a better overview of where that is, but I know at least UCSB and the other UCs aren't using Fedora, so Unfortunately, I don't have first-hand experience of testing Valkyrie against Fedora. So for those who do use Fedora, we would love your help in getting some more robust testing. The other news is we're having an upcoming Hyrex Valkyrized community effort. So I know there have been emails about supporting this work, either financially or with developer time. So if you haven't signed up for that and you are an institution using Valkyrie, that we would love if you could contribute. So there are 3 milestones that we have planned. The first one is to have Hyrex using Valkyrie backed entirely by Postgres. So if any of you have worked on the new Rax PG repository, that was kind of the early work in terms of integrating Hyrex and Valkyrie and making sure the entire stack works with the new Valkyrie storage adapters. Milestone 2 is Fedora focused, live migrating an existing Fedora 4 backed Hyrex repository to Valkyrie Postgres. And then milestone 3 is Fedora 6 Valkyrie. So yeah, again, if you are using Fedora, your institution, those second 2 milestones will hopefully be what you've been waiting for. So I will link this in Slack as well. And those were the 2 main updates that I had. So if people have questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Otherwise, I can just keep this really brief.
Thanks so much, Alexandra. Any questions before we move on? Okay, we will move on then to the next lightning talk, which is Welcome to the Derivative Rodeo, which is presented by Jeremy Friesen from softservebyscientist.com. Jeremy.
Hello, everyone. Let's get this. We're going to leave Slack. That's just treacherous. And got to do a little bit of tidying up. All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Jeremy Friesen. Use he, him pronouns. I work at Software Services by Scientist.com. I'm a senior lead engineer there. I'm also on the Samvera board, and I'm really glad to be here again. So, quick overview. In this talk, I'm going to go through the problem statement, a little bit of history, a little bit about the rodeo, and then some wrap up. Problem statement. Given that I have 1,000,000 billion objects, when I ingest those objects, then things are really slow. Also, given those 1,000,000 billion objects, and I already have a mixture of derivatives, sometimes I want to use those derivatives. Here's a little bit of history. I'll walk through the derivatives, Hydra derivatives, Hyrex derivative service, newspaper works, IIIF print, and the derivative rodeo. The Hydra derivatives is a venerable and long used gem for generating derivatives for the Samvera community. We got a little slide mix up here. It's very configurable and extensible and has been used for quite some time. The Hyrex derivative service implements an interface for generating derivatives for a file set. This is a point of configuration that has been implemented since, I believe, at least Hyrex 2. So most folks that we're working with are on this state. What it allows for is this idea of plug-in services that you can say, which one, find me a valid one, and then when I find my first one, use that one to create derivatives, which is where the Hyrex file set derivatives service class comes into play. It leverages Hydra derivatives and by default is the one and only registered service. It is the long-standing approach for the derivatives, Basically what it does is for each original file, it creates the derivatives of that original file based on its MIME type. The newspaper works gem was created by the Boston Public Library and the University of Utah, and it introduced quite a few concepts, models for title, issue, page, and article of newspapers, batch ingest, OCR, the list goes on. And it had quite a few interesting and new approaches. First, it created a new derivative service and registered that in Hyrax, which replaced or supplemented the file set derivative service. For Newman Numismatic Portal, NNP, we leveraged the newspaper works gem at SoftServe and made a few modifications and omissions. Fundamentally, we wanted to rip these PDFs apart that we had and make one image per page, run OCR on those images, and then index the image text as part of the parent PDF. All of this was in service of creating a better IIIF viewer experience for PDFs. The default PDF experience may not be desired, and what we found is having one image per page makes a much richer experience that aligns better with a lot of the universal viewer experience. Enter the woefully incorrect named gem IIIF print. This was something we extracted from NNP, Newman Numismatic Portal, and other haiku installations that we were working on are now using this. So this is a subset of newspaper works where we split a PDF, we implement searching and adjust the IIIF manifest, do some auto assignment of parent-child relationships, and extract some text. It does some of this by, again, creating that derivative service and then configuring it in Hyrax. Enter the rodeo. Finally, the thing we're here to talk about. This is a further decomposition of the IIIF print gem. In the future, the IIIF print will depend on the rodeo and be renamed to something rodeo adjacent, as well as provide the parent-child relationship management and search indexing behavior. That's what IIIF print will provide. Still not in the rodeo, I guess. But why make more gems? First, we want to do the PDF splitting and text extraction in a distributed environment like AWS Lambdas. We found that we can parallelize a lot of those things and get rapid processing, several hours to do a whole corpus of a repository. We also realize, hey, given that we're generating some of the derivatives in AWS Lambda, why don't we generate other ones in there? Further, we also want to have our Lambda functions use the same code as our monolith, the Hyrax application, or other Rails applications. Here's a little diagram kind of highlighting what's going on in the rodeo. The sources at the top are the disparate places where we might find the original files or the derivatives that we want to pre-process. So we gather them up, we kind of sort them into these different categories, and then we import them and we shuffle the appropriate image, Hawker, and text file to a file set 1 and file set 2. So the pre-process is that Lambda space and the import is the Hyrax space. And that's basically what I just said. The derivative rodeo knows how to find or create these requisite derivatives. The fundamental process involved is check, do I have something here? If not, fetch from somewhere there and put it here. And if none of that happens, generate it here. And here depends on where things are running. So to wrap up, the existing Hyrax implementation does not handle the case where we already have some or all of the desired derivatives. And if you're looking to rip apart PDFs, the processing within Hyrax is slow. Where can we find the derivative rodeo? SoftServe, we're iterating on these concepts. They are in production and stable, but not yet factored towards multiple use cases. And I provide the links here for derivative rodeo and derivative rodeo. Now for a little sidebar, why the two names? This is a little insight into soft serve. Rob and I have been playing this game of tennis. We both are writing up the code and then we respond to it. And we need to do a lot of this asynchronously, in part because Rob's has a particularly challenging calendar constraints. So our synchronous conversations, we include another developer to help make sure that we're creating the most accessible code. And the dash rodeo was one exploration through extraction, naming, and working through the process flow. The underscore rodeo is a further distillation and simplification of the dash rodeo. Ultimately, in our conversations, we pulled up the name your gem, and the underscore is more idiomatic. So we're settling on derivative rodeo. And please talk to Rob about those naming conventions. He was there when they were established. What's next? This is all a work in progress, some of it running in production across different haikus. And our plan, as I mentioned, was to get these a little more stabilized, then move them into labs, and hopefully have other people working on them as well. If this is something you want to work on and see a need, please hop into the derivative underscore rodeo in our scientist-soft-serve repository. So again, thank you. I will be wrangling up some of this in the future for a blog post, and also we'll have the video. I'll take any questions at this time.
Thank you so much, Jeremy. Any questions? Right. I am not seeing any at the time, for the time being. So we might choose to move on then to the final lightning talk, which will be presented by Daniel Pierce at Indiana University, titled Shampooing Hyrax, Reducing Test Flakes. Daniel?
Hello, everyone. I'm back from yesterday. Daniel Pierce, developer at Indiana University Libraries and the Hyrax technical lead. And this talk is brought to you by the scruffiest Hyrax the internet has to offer. There's also a picture of Hyrax having a bad hair day right here. So reducing test flakes or flaky tests. I imagine some of you might wonder what exactly a flaky test is. Well, it's a test that fails. Sometimes. This can happen for a few different reasons. One thing that can happen is from unpredictable code, which means that, well, one prime example is asynchronous JavaScript inside of feature tests, where a headless browser is spun up and tries to run a script, but there's a pop-up box that has generated by JavaScript, and there's a callback, and you have to wait for it to load, and maybe the code running the specs doesn't wait long enough, or something of that nature. Another type is brought on by the side effects of other tests that have already been run, or in other words, there's leftover data from those earlier tests. And that's the type I'm going to discuss today. So frequently when running tests on Hyrax, and I imagine also on your own code repositories, you might see a result out of CircleCI or whichever service you like to use that looks like this. This is actually the PR that Tamsin and I were using, or I should say this is the branch that Tamsin and I were using to bring, to test Ruby 3 code on Hyrax, or to test Hyrax on Ruby 3. This was actually the last rebase of this branch on main as we successfully integrated more and more fixes. And you can see that the Ruby 2.7 job is the one that failed here, while all of the Ruby 3 jobs down below are fine. That seems a little suspect. Even the Valkyrie mode Ruby 2.7 passed. So this is a flaky test. It doesn't happen all the time. Circle CI tries to identify these with this little flaky tag here. Given our project's complexity, sometimes this doesn't show up, especially if it's one that's not seen very often. So what a lot of people do in this case, and what I've done frequently, is just hit this little restart with an X symbol, which means just retry whatever job failed here. And that might work. I mean, they are flaky tests, so they fail sometimes. But it's a waste of resources. It's a waste of CI time, which, you know, if we're paying for CI time, that's also a waste of money. I don't know exactly what dollar amount every run of these tests would cost in the IRX case, but they add up. It's also a waste of developer time. We have to go in here, say, oh, why did my PR fail? Oh, it's a flaky test. Let me click the button and wait another 10 minutes or 20 minutes or however long it takes. So how do we fix this flaky test? Well, first, we have to identify what is failing and why it's failing. So here's the output from that failed test. You can see that is this collection member service. Actually, let me go back for a second. You can see that the name of this was the Hierarchs Collections collection member service add member method when single membership collection error raises an error. Something went wrong with that. So here's what this looks like in Circle CI, looking at the failed RSpec. In the actual output of RSpec, there's two different views that you can actually see in Circle CI. There's one where it kind of summarizes all of the failed specs and gives you the output from them. But sometimes you need a little more context about what's actually going on. In that case, you have to go in and look at the actual RSpec output. And there's a couple reasons for that, for our purposes here. One is it tells you what the randomized seed is, and that's important for later. In this case, 15209. The reason that's important is because RSpec by default runs the list of specs you give it, whether or not that's a specific list or just all of your specs, in a random order. And the purpose of that is to catch flaky tests like this, where the data could change from one test to another. So to identify the culprit here, like what is causing this collection member service spec to fail, it itself isn't broken. Something else has broken it. And maybe the fix lies within the collection member service spec, or maybe it lies within whatever other spec we figure out is causing problems. So what we need to do is make use of a feature that RSpec has called bisect. And that is a tool that takes a list of the specs and runs them to find the failure, and then successively removes more and more of the specs to figure out exactly which two, hopefully with only two, caused the problem. So to do that, we need to get the list of specs that was actually run in this Circle CI run. This is complicated a little bit because for Hierarchs, we actually split all the specs over 10 different runners. And so any given RSpec run is only actually running about 1/10 of the tests. And that is affected by this random seed. If you apply the random seed to just a different list of specs, you're going to get bad results or unusable results. So here's where we can find out what exactly was run. Now, this wasn't actually available until in Hierarchs Circle CI output until just recently, because I switched the Circle CI orb. An orb is like a collection of helper methods. I switched from something that we created ourselves that lived in the Samvera Circle CI orb that its purpose was to run RSpec. But I switched to kind of the upstream one that Circle CI itself makes. And part of that is they enable in the shell. So this output up here, this is a screenshot, so I can't scroll up. But right before they run RSpec, they enable the X option. I forget what word that stands for. Explain maybe. But the result of that is the command that's being run is output in the output. So we can see right here it has this plus in front of it. This highlighted line is the actual command that's being run. So bundle exec rspec, and then a list of all the spec files in this 1/10 slice of all the specs. Now you might notice that this goes off the right side of the screen. This is a very long list. In fact, if we copy that whole line into a text editor, it is this large. You can see that it includes the seed here. So this is all the specs that run in that one instance that things failed. Now, there's another reason to copy this into a text editor, and that is, it turns out on many systems, there's actually a limit of 4,095 characters to go into a terminal command. And it turns out that this length currently is just a little bit longer than 4,000. So what would happen is you try and copy this whole big line and some would get cut off. So you might not end up with all the specs here. You'd probably end up with a bad path. So we take all this output, put it into a script file that we can run. I would just put it in the Hyrax root directory. So root of the Git repo. Copy all that in there. Go start up your DASI compose, your Docker container. Get into it by using the exec command to get into a shell, change to the Hyrax engine directory, potentially run bundle install because sometimes there's a little mismatch of gems depending on what you've been doing. And then I don't have it displayed here, but run the shell script you have. And what that does is it starts doing this bisect option, and it actually won't output anything for a while here. You can see at the bottom it says running suite to find failures, and that's going to take several minutes at least while it does its work. But eventually, it should output something that looks like this, where it has removed examples that didn't cause failures until, after several minutes, it'll give you a minimal reproduction command. In this case, rspec run, in this case, there's only one spec in this particular file, but the delete resource feature spec, run that first, and then run this collection member service spec, which is the one we noticed that was failing. So those two run just by themselves, and we have the seed included here, but almost for sure this is going to be the first one that gets run, the delete resource spec in this case. So you take that command, you can run it directly in the shell you're already in. I like to add in this format documentation option just so it lists the names of the specs that it's running. And it should give you that same failure. So that's the easy part of all this, to fix a flaky spec. Now we'd have to go look into the code and see what conflict there is here. I haven't done that yet. I've just made sure that I know which specs are having problems. So that was the easy part. The hard part is actually fixing it. But I hope you learned a little something from this. And there's many flaky specs we've had in Hyrax that come up all the time. So it's a good thing that you can do when you have kind of a little break with nothing else to really focus on. You just need to improve something. So thank you. And thank you all for coming to this virtual connect. It's been great talks. If there's any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Thank you so much, Daniel. Any questions? Daniel, there was one question in the chat that was asked more generally, but maybe you have experienced this, of examples of a time that fixing a flaky test involved code changes as opposed to changing the test or the test setup. Do you have any experience of that?
Nothing comes to mind off the top of my head. I suppose it's possible, although that probably points to some sort of code smells. Usually in my experience, it ends up being something like a factor is used to create an object, maybe with a title or an ID, especially if you're using like a literal ID, like, no, this is test, the test object. And then something else wants to load up all of those kinds of objects, and somehow that object didn't get cleared out or something along those lines. Usually it's the spec code themselves that causes the problem.
All right. Thank you, Daniel. Any other questions? Okay. Well, thank you again. We will move on now to the last session of today, which is a closing and wrap up presented by Heather Greer-Klein.
Hey, everybody. Thanks, Nick. No slides or anything. Full disclosure, this was really to make sure we had some buffer time for anything that went wrong today, and so we could make sure that we got all of our lightning talks in. I just wanted to thank the program committee for Virtual Connect again, Nick for being an awesome host today, Emily and Margaret, who've been doing a lot of really important behind the scenes stuff that helps make this all flow well. And thanks to everyone who's presented today and yesterday. These were great sessions, and to everyone who's attended. I'll be sending out emails with some links. We talked about a lot. We have a lot going on in the community right now. A lot of links were shared, so I'll be sending those out so they're easy to get to. Presenters, I'll be sending a message about sharing your slides, and we can put them in the community repository and link them up also right on the schedule in the wiki. I will also send out a message. It'll probably be next week with the links to a playlist in YouTube where we'll break out all the individual sessions so you can review something that you missed or share those with colleagues. But thanks again, everybody. I hope to see you virtually in interest or working group meeting soon, a tech call or a partners meeting, and hope to see you in person in Philadelphia later this year. So thanks again, everybody.